When a man who spent years running from war finally stops to save the enemy's daughter, he doesn't realize he's signed his own death warrant. Colonel Rhett Calder doesn't forgive deserters, and he doesn't forgive mercy. But in the unforgiving wilderness of the Montana frontier, where every shadow hides a hunter and every choice carries the weight of blood, former Lieutenant Elias Vance will discover that redemption doesn't come from forgetting who you were. It comes from choosing who you'll become, even if that choice kills you. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The wind off the Bitterroot Mountains carried the smell of pine and something darker, smoke from fires that had burned weeks ago but still haunted the valleys like ghosts. Spring of 1871 had come late to Montana territory, and the snow hadn't fully released its grip on the high country. Down in the basin where Calder's camp sprawled across what used to be a trading post, men moved with the restless energy of predators with nowhere left to hunt. Elias Vance stood at the edge of the compound, one boot propped on a split-rail fence that had seen better days, watching the sun sink behind peaks that looked like broken teeth against the sky. He was 32 but felt older, felt like something that had been used up and discarded, a tool worn down to nothing useful. His coat hung loose on a frame that had been broader once, before months of poor rations and poorer sleep had whittled him down to sinew and bone. Behind him, laughter erupted from the main lodge, harsh, brittle sounds that had nothing to do with joy. Calder was holding court again, telling stories about the war that got bloodier and more heroic with each retelling. The truth was uglier. The truth always was. You gonna stand out here all night feeling sorry for yourself, or you gonna come inside where it's warm? Elias didn't turn. He knew the voice, Marcus Webb, one of Calder's true believers, a man who'd found purpose in violence and never looked back. I'm good here. Colonel wants to see you. Tell him I'll be along. He said now, Elias. The use of his first name was deliberate, a small insult wrapped in familiarity. Webb was younger, maybe 25, with the kind of eager cruelty that came from never having to question orders. He'd killed his first man at 16 and treated it like a baptism. Elias let the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable, then pushed off the fence and turned. Webb stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, trying to look casual but wound tight as a spring. Everything about him was coiled, ready. After you, Elias said. The lodge was a long, low building with a stone fireplace at one end throwing shadows that danced like demons across walls covered in maps, animal hides, and weapons. 20 men occupied the space, some playing cards, some cleaning rifles, all of them performing the rituals of soldiers with no war left to fight. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of men living too close together. Colonel Rhett Calder sat in a chair that might as well have been a throne, positioned where the firelight would catch him just right, turning his face into sharp angles and his eyes into pits of reflected flame. He was 48, built like a bull that had survived every fight by being meaner than whatever came at it. His beard was mostly gray now, but his hands were steady, and his voice still carried the weight of command. Elias. He didn't stand. Good of you to join us. Sir. Calder gestured at an empty chair, but Elias remained standing. A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, or calculation, crossed the colonel's face before he smiled. It wasn't a warm expression. We're planning an operation, Calder said. Northern hunting grounds, 3 days' ride. There's a Blackfoot band settled near Cutthroat Creek. Small group, maybe 40 people. They've been trading with settlers, getting comfortable. Elias kept his expression neutral. What's the objective? Supplies, horses, whatever they've got worth taking. Calder leaned forward. But there's something specific I want. The chief has a daughter, early 20s from what I hear. They call her something that translates to Redwind or Stormbringer. Depends who you ask. Either way, she's supposed to be exceptional. The room had gone quiet. Men who'd been pretending not to listen were now openly watching. Exceptional how? Elias asked, though he already knew he didn't want the answer. Smart, fierce, sacred, according to their beliefs. Calder's smile widened. I want her alive, unharmed. You understand? Elias understood perfectly, and the understanding sat in his stomach like poison. Why? The question hung in the air. Several men shifted uncomfortably. You didn't question Calder's orders, not if you valued your teeth, but Calder just laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Because I can, Elias. Because we won the war and they lost, and the spoils belong to the victors. Because I'm building something here, and that requires symbols. Power respects power, and taking their sacred princess sends a message. He stood slowly, unfolding to his full height. Any other questions, Lieutenant? The old rank was a warning. Elias recognized the tone from 100 briefings before 100 battles, the moment when discussion ended and obedience began. No, sir. Good. We ride at first light. You'll lead the advance scout. Calder picked up a glass of whiskey from the table beside him, dismissing Elias with the gesture. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Elias left without saluting. Small rebellions were all he had left. Outside, the night had turned cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. He walked past the barracks toward the far edge of camp, where he'd staked out a spot beneath a stand of pines. Couldn't sleep in the bunkhouse anymore. Too many bodies, too many snores, too many men who slept soundly after doing terrible things. He built a small fire and sat watching the flames, thinking about the girl they were going to take. Wondered if she knew what was coming. Wondered if her father knew, if he'd felt the shift in the air that always preceded violence. Elias had a daughter once. Her name was Sarah, and she'd been 6 years old when fever took her while he was away fighting in Virginia. His wife had written him a letter, careful, precise handwriting describing how Sarah had asked for him at the end, how she'd been brave, how she was at peace now. He'd received the letter 3 weeks after Sarah was buried, sitting in a trench outside Petersburg while artillery screamed overhead. He'd stopped believing in peace after that, stopped believing in much of anything except the weight of his rifle and the orders that kept him moving forward, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning. The war had ended in 1865, but Calder's war never ended. He'd gathered men like Elias, broken things looking for purpose, and pointed them at new enemies. Reconstruction was chaos, the frontier was lawless, and men like Calder thrived in the spaces where order broke down. For a while, Elias had thrived too, or at least survived. Same thing, mostly. But something had shifted in the last year. Maybe it was the raid on the Crow settlement where they'd burned lodges with families still inside. Maybe it was the prospector they'd left hanging from a tree for the crime of filing a claim Calder wanted. Maybe it was the accumulation of small atrocities that finally outweighed the numbness. Or maybe he was just tired. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams of Sarah calling his name from somewhere he couldn't reach. Dawn broke gray and cold, the sun struggling to burn through clouds that promised rain. 40 men assembled in the compound. Too many for a simple raid, but Calder never did anything simple. He sat astride a big roan gelding, looking every inch the conquering general, while men checked weapons and supplies with the efficiency of long practice. Elias saddled his horse, a rangy buckskin mare with a white blaze and a tendency to bite, and loaded his saddlebags with jerky, hardtack, and ammunition. His rifle was a Spencer repeating carbine, well-maintained but showing wear. He'd carried it through the war and after, and it had never jammed when he needed it. Sometimes he wondered if that was blessing or curse. "Scout team, move out," Calder ordered. Elias rode at the head of a group of 5, with Webb at his side looking eager and 2 brothers named Keller, who were good at tracking and better at killing. The 5th man was a half-breed guide called River, who didn't talk much but knew the territory like he'd been born from it. They moved north through country that was trying to decide if it wanted to be beautiful or brutal, and landing somewhere in between. The terrain shifted from pine forests to sagebrush flats to rocky outcrops where water ran in thin, clear streams over stones that had been there since before men had names for things. The sky opened up to a blue so deep it hurt to look at, and hawks circled on thermals, hunting. River led them wide of the main trails, following paths only visible to someone who knew how to read the landscape. They saw deer, elk, and once a grizzly fishing in a stream who watched them pass with the disinterest of an apex predator with a full stomach. The Keller brothers wanted to shoot it for the hide, but Elias vetoed the idea. No point announcing their presence with gunfire. By noon of the 3rd day, they'd reached the high country overlooking Cutthroat Creek. River held up a hand and the group stopped at the edge of a pine stand with a clear view of the valley below. The Blackfoot camp sat in a natural basin where the creek widened into a series of pools. Maybe 15 lodges arranged in a loose circle, smoke rising from cook fires, horses grazing in a rope corral. People moved between the structures, women working hides, children playing, men preparing for what looked like a hunting expedition. Peaceful, Webb said, and there was something ugly in his voice. Elias studied the camp through field glasses, counting numbers, noting positions. 40 people, like Calder had said. Maybe a dozen warriors, the rest women, children, elders. They weren't fortified, weren't expecting trouble. There, River pointed. Elias swung the glasses to where a young woman emerged from one of the larger lodges. Even at distance, there was something about the way she moved, confident, purposeful, like she owned the ground she walked on. She wore buckskin decorated with quillwork and beadwork that caught the sun, her dark hair in 2 long braids, and she carried herself with the kind of natural authority that didn't need to announce itself. "That's her," River said. "Kaia Redwind, Chief's daughter." Webb grinned. "She's prettier than I expected. Colonel's going to be pleased." Elias lowered the glasses, fighting the urge to put his fist through Webb's teeth. "Mark the approaches. We hit them tomorrow at dawn." "Why wait?" "Because I said so." Elias met Webb's stare until the younger man looked away. "We do this smart, or we don't do it at all." They spent the rest of the day watching the camp, noting patterns of movement, identifying the warriors who might put up resistance. Elias sketched a map in his journal, marking positions, escape routes, vulnerabilities. It was mechanical work, the kind of planning he'd done 100 times before. But this time felt different. This time he kept seeing Sarah's face superimposed over the Blackfoot children playing in the dirt, kept hearing his wife's voice in his head, asking him who he'd become. That night, camped in a draw 2 miles from the target, the scout team sat around a small fire eating jerky and drinking coffee that tasted like boiled leather. "You ever wonder why we're doing this?" Elias asked. The question landed like a stone in still water. The Keller brothers exchanged glances. River stared into the fire, expressionless. Webb stopped mid-chew and looked at Elias like he'd started speaking in tongues. "What kind of question is that?" Webb said. "The kind I'm asking. We're doing it because the colonel ordered it. Same reason we do anything." "That's not a reason," Elias said. "That's just following orders. I'm asking why. What's the point? What are we building here?" Webb's face darkened. "You got a problem with the colonel? You should take it up with him." "I'm not talking about the colonel. I'm talking about us, you, me. What we're doing tomorrow." Elias gestured toward the valley where the Blackfoot camp lay sleeping. "Those people aren't our enemies. They're not soldiers. They're families trying to survive, same as anyone." "They're hostiles," Webb said. "They're in our way." "Our way to what? More raiding? More killing? When does it end?" "It ends when we win." "We already won the war, Marcus. This isn't war. This is just—" Elias stopped, searching for words. "This is just cruelty for its own sake." Webb stood abruptly, hand dropping to his pistol. "You calling me cruel?" Elias stood too, slower, keeping his hands visible. The Keller brothers had gone quiet, watching with the detached interest of men waiting to see which way violence would break. River still stared at the fire, but his posture had shifted subtly, ready. "I'm saying we've got a choice," Elias said carefully. "We always have a choice. And tomorrow, we're choosing to attack people who haven't done anything to us because a man we follow told us to. I'm asking if that sits right with you." For a moment, Webb looked like he might draw. His jaw worked, his eyes narrow and hot. Then he spat into the fire and sat back down. "You're weak, Elias. Always have been. That's why you'll never be more than what you are." He picked up his coffee. "But you'll follow orders tomorrow, same as the rest of us, because when it comes down to it, you don't have the spine to do anything else." Elias wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat because Webb was probably right. He'd been following orders his whole adult life. First the Union Army, then Calder's Raiders, always someone else making the hard choices while he just pulled the trigger and told himself he was doing his duty. He sat back down and stared into the fire until his eyes burned. Dawn came with rain, a cold, steady drizzle that turned the world gray and made everything harder. The main force had arrived in the night and assembled in the trees above the Blackfoot camp. 40 men on horseback, armed with rifles, pistols, and the kind of grim determination that came from knowing exactly what they were about to do. Calder sat his horse at the center of the line, water streaming off his hat brim, looking like some ancient god of war. He raised his hand, held it there while the rain fell and the horses stamped, and the moment stretched out like wire pulled too tight. Then he dropped his hand and they charged. The camp had no chance. Men on horseback erupted from the tree line with guns already firing, and the morning dissolved into chaos and screaming. Lodges collapsed under the weight of horses crashing through them. Women grabbed children and ran, but there was nowhere to run. The warriors tried to mount a defense, forming a line with rifles and bows, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Elias rode in the second wave, his rifle unfired, watching the massacre unfold with a sick, helpless feeling in his gut. A warrior ran at him with a war axe, and Elias turned his horse aside at the last second, letting the man pass. Someone else shot him in the back. "There," Calder's voice cut through the din. "The chief's lodge. She's there." A group of men dismounted and rushed the largest structure. Elias heard screams from inside, then the sound of things breaking. A man backed out holding his arm where someone had stabbed him with a knife. Two more emerged, dragging a struggling woman between them. Kaia Redwin fought like a wildcat, all teeth and nails and fury. She'd slashed one man's face to ribbons before they got her arms pinned, and even then she kicked and writhed and cursed in a language Elias didn't know, but whose meaning was perfectly clear. "Bind her," Calder ordered, "carefully." They wrestled her to the ground while Webb tied her wrists with leather cord. She spat in his face, and he backhanded her hard enough that blood exploded from her split lip. The sight of it sparked something hot and immediate in Elias's chest. "Enough," he heard himself say. Calder turned to look at him, eyebrows raised. "Something to add, Lieutenant?" Elias met the colonel's stare and saw nothing there but cold calculation. This wasn't rage or passion, this was business. Kaia was an asset to be acquired, and the blood and screaming around them were just the cost of doing business. "She's secured," Elias said. "No need to damage her further." "Damage, eh?" Calder tasted the word. "Interesting choice. You worried about her, Elias?" "I'm worried about following orders. You said you wanted her alive and unharmed." For a long moment, Calder said nothing. Then he smiled that terrible smile and turned away. "Fair point. Webb, easy on the merchandise. We've got a long ride ahead." The raid lasted maybe 20 minutes. When it was over, the Blackfoot camp was destroyed, lodges burning, supplies scattered, bodies lying in the mud and rain. The warriors who'd survived had fled into the hills. The women and children who hadn't escaped were corralled at gunpoint while Calder's men went through the camp like locusts, taking anything of value. Kaia knelt in the center of the carnage, wrists bound, blood running from her split lip to mix with the rain on her chin. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just stared at Calder with eyes that promised murder if she ever got the chance. "Beautiful," Calder said, studying her like a piece of art. "Absolutely beautiful. Your father should have protected you better, girl," she answered in Blackfoot, the words sharp and cutting. River, standing nearby, translated without being asked. "She says her father is dead. You killed him when you burned the eastern hunting grounds last autumn." Calder's expression didn't change. "Then he should have taught you to run faster." He gestured to Webb. "Put her on a horse. We're leaving." They rode out as the last lodges collapsed into smoke and ash. Elias took one look back and saw an old woman holding a dead child, rocking back and forth in the mud, keening a grief that would never find words. He turned forward and kept riding. The journey back to camp took 3 days, but it felt longer. Kaia rode with her hands bound to the saddle horn, a guard on either side. And she didn't speak. Didn't eat when they offered her food. Didn't drink when they gave her water. Just sat straight-backed and silent, staring ahead like she was looking at something none of them could see. Elias watched her from a distance and felt the weight of what they'd done settling into his bones like winter cold. He'd been part of raids before, plenty of them. Had done things he wasn't proud of in the name of following orders. But this felt different. This felt like they'd crossed some line that couldn't be uncrossed. On the second night, camped in a canyon where the wind howled through gaps in the rock, Calder called Elias to his fire. "You've been quiet," the colonel said, pouring whiskey into 2 tin cups. "That's not like you." "Just tired." "Tired." Calder handed him a cup. "Or questioning." Elias took the whiskey but didn't drink. Both, maybe. Questioning's dangerous, Elias. Start small, like a crack in a dam. Pretty soon the whole thing comes apart. Calder sipped his drink, watching the firelight play across the canyon walls. I need to know you're with me. Need to know when I give an order, you'll follow it without hesitation. I've always followed your orders. But you've started asking why. That's new. That's problematic. Calder leaned forward. Let me tell you something about why. Why doesn't matter. What matters is strength, power, the ability to take what you want and hold it against anyone who tries to take it from you. That's the only truth in this world, Elias. Everything else is just pretty lies people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. And the girl? The girl is a symbol. Her people worshipped her like she was touched by the divine. Now she belongs to me. That's power. That's the message I'm sending, that nothing is sacred, nothing is safe, nothing is beyond my reach. Calder's eyes gleamed. You understand? Elias looked into his cup, watching the whiskey catch the light. He understood perfectly. Understood that Calder had gone so far down the road of cruelty that he couldn't see anything else. Understood that following this man meant becoming something Elias didn't want to be. Maybe didn't want to be anymore. I understand, he said, and stood to leave. Elias! Calder's voice stopped him. There's no walking away from this. You know that, right? You're in it now, same as everyone else. You try to leave, and I'll hunt you down. Not because I'm angry, because I can't let anyone think desertion is an option. I'm not deserting. Good, Calder smiled, because I'd hate to lose you. You're one of the few men I've got with a conscience. Makes you reliable in ways the others aren't. A man with a conscience will go farther to prove he's still on the right side. Elias walked away without responding, the whiskey burning in his hand like acid. That night, he couldn't sleep. Lay in his bedroll staring at stars that appeared and disappeared behind racing clouds, listening to the camp settle into the rhythms of rest. Somewhere nearby, Kaia was tied to a tree, a guard watching her. She hadn't made a sound since they'd taken her. No crying, no pleading, just silence that somehow felt louder than screaming. Around 3 a.m, he heard her singing. It was barely audible, a low chant in a language he didn't understand, but it carried through the canyon like water over stone. The guard yelled at her to shut up, but she kept singing until he kicked her hard enough that the sound turned into a gasp and stopped. Elias lay there hating himself for not intervening and hating the guard for doing what he was probably ordered to do and hating Calder for creating a world where this was normal. Mostly, though, he hated the man he'd become. The one who could lie in the dark, listening to someone suffer, and tell himself there was nothing he could do about it. They reached Calder's compound late on the 3rd day. The colonel rode in like a conquering hero, and his men cheered, those who'd stayed behind hearing the story of the raid, seeing the captive girl as proof of their invincibility. Calder had quarters prepared for Kaia in a storage shed converted into a cell, 4 walls, a barred window, a straw mattress on a dirt floor. He posted guards with orders to keep her fed and alive but not comfortable. Break her spirit, he told Webb, not her body. I want her useful, not broken. Elias watched them lock her inside and felt something crack in his chest. That night, he sat in front of his fire again, drinking coffee that had gone cold, trying to figure out when he'd stopped being a soldier and started being a monster. The line between the two had blurred so gradually he hadn't noticed the transition. But he noticed now. Around midnight, when the camp had gone quiet, except for guards walking their rounds, Elias made a decision that probably meant his death, but might save something more important than his life. He stood, checked his rifle, and walked toward the storage shed where they were keeping Kaia Redwind. The guard on duty was one of the Keller brothers, the older one, Tom, who had a wife and kid somewhere back east he never talked about. He looked up when Elias approached, surprised. Lieutenant, something wrong? I'll take the watch, Elias said. Colonel wants you for something. It was a transparent lie, but Tom was tired and didn't question it. He handed over the key to the cell and walked off toward the main lodge. Elias waited until he was out of sight, then unlocked the door and stepped inside. Kaia sat in the corner, knees drawn up, watching him with eyes that reflected lamplight like an animal's. Her lip had swollen where Webb hit her, and bruises darkened her wrists where the ropes had cut in. I'm not here to hurt you, Elias said. She didn't respond, didn't move, just stared. I'm going to get you out of here tonight, but you have to trust me. Trust. The word came out rough, her accent heavy but her English clear. Why would I trust you? You're one of them. I know, but I'm trying not to be anymore. Trying, she laughed, bitter and sharp. My father tried to make peace. My mother tried to teach me your language so we could talk instead of fight. Look where trying got them. Elias knelt slowly, keeping his hands visible. I can't undo what happened, can't bring back the people we killed or fix what we broke. But I can get you out, give you a chance to make it back to your people. And then what? You go back to killing someone else? Maybe. Or maybe I figure out how to stop being what I've been and start being something else. He met her eyes. I don't have answers, just a choice. And I'm choosing to help you if you'll let me. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for deception or weakness or whatever it was she needed to see. Then she stood, moving stiffly, bruised and exhausted but unbroken. How? She asked. Horses are in the corral, supplies in the barn. We take what we need and ride north before anyone realizes you're gone. They'll come after us, but if we move fast, we might get enough of a head start to make it to the high country. After that, he shrugged. After that, we improvise. We. Kaia's eyes narrowed. You're coming with me? I can't stay here, not after this. Calder will know I helped you escape. He'll hunt me down either way. Elias stood. So, yeah, we. She thought about it, weighing options, calculating odds. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and definitive. Then let's go. They moved through the compound like shadows, keeping to the dark spaces between buildings. The guards were lazy, used to easy duty with no real threats, and Elias knew their patterns well enough to slip past. They reached the barn without incident and gathered what they needed: saddles, bedrolls, dried meat, ammunition, 2 canteens of water. The horses were restless, sensing something wrong. Elias saddled his buckskin mare and a solid bay gelding for Kaia, moving with practiced efficiency. She worked alongside him, her hands quick and sure despite the rope burns. You've done this before, he said. My people live on horseback. I could ride before I could walk. They led the horses out of the corral, walking them until they were clear of the compound before mounting up. The night was cold and clear, the moon 3/4 full, giving them just enough light to see by. Behind them, Calder's camp lay quiet and unsuspecting. North? Kaia asked. North? Elias confirmed. Hard and fast. They'll figure it out by dawn, and when they do, they'll come with everything they've got. She looked at him one more time, and something shifted in her expression. Not trust exactly, but maybe the possibility of it somewhere down the road. Then we'd better not stop, she said, and kicked her horse into a gallop. Elias followed, and together they disappeared into the wilderness with nothing but stars overhead and the certainty of pursuit behind them. 2 people from opposite sides of an endless war, bound together now by choice and circumstance, riding toward an uncertain future that might kill them both, but at least offered something Elias hadn't felt in years. It offered the chance to be better than what he'd been, and for now, that was enough. The horses ran until their breath came in ragged clouds and foam flecked their necks. Elias pushed them hard through terrain that shifted from pine forest to open grassland to rocky draws where water ran cold and fast over stones that could break a horse's leg if you weren't careful. The moon tracked their progress across the sky, indifferent to the 2 riders racing beneath it like their lives depended on speed, which they did. Kaia rode like she was part of the horse, moving with the animal's rhythm in a way that made Elias's own riding look mechanical by comparison. She didn't speak, didn't look back, just kept her eyes forward and her body low, pushing the bay gelding to its limits without breaking it. They crossed 3 streams before dawn, staying in the water for stretches to break their trail, then cutting north again toward high country, where the terrain would make tracking harder. Elias's mind raced through calculations. How long before Tom realized he'd been lied to? How long before someone checked Kaia's cell? How long before Calder assembled a pursuit party? Best case, they had until sunrise. Worst case, they were already being followed. As gray light began to seep into the eastern sky, Elias guided them into a narrow canyon with walls that rose steep on both sides and a trickle of water running down the middle. He dismounted, legs shaking from hours in the saddle, and led his mare deeper into the canyon where an overhang offered shelter from above. Kaia slid off her horse and stood swaying slightly, exhaustion catching up with her now that they'd stopped moving. Her face was pale beneath the bruises, and blood had seeped through the fabric of her shirt where the ropes had rubbed her wrists raw. "We rest here," Elias said, unsaddling the horses. "1 hour, maybe 2. Let them recover." She nodded but didn't sit. Instead, she walked to where the water pooled in a depression between rocks and knelt, cupping her hands to drink. The water ran clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from peaks still visible in the distance. When she'd drunk her fill, she wet the hem of her shirt and cleaned the blood from her wrists with methodical care. Elias watched her, struck by how composed she was. Most people who'd been through what she'd experienced in the last 3 days would be broken or hysterical or catatonic. But Kaia moved with purpose, tending her wounds like they were problems to be solved rather than trauma to be processed. "You should eat something," he said, pulling jerky from his saddlebag. "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway. We've got a long way to go, and you'll need the strength." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, her dark eyes steady and measuring. "Why are you doing this?" "I told you." "You told me words. I want to know the truth." She stood, water dripping from her hands. "Men like you don't suddenly grow a conscience. So what changed? What made you decide to betray your colonel and help the enemy?" Elias sat down on a flat rock and pulled off his hat, running fingers through hair that needed cutting. How to explain something he barely understood himself. "I had a daughter," he said finally. "Sarah. She died while I was at war, 6 years old." The words came out flat, emotionless, because that was the only way he could say them. "I wasn't there when she died. Wasn't there for any of it. Just got a letter telling me she was gone, and by the time I got home, she'd been in the ground for a month." Kaia didn't speak, but she sat down across from him, listening. "After that, I stopped caring about much of anything. Followed orders, fought battles, did what I was told because it was easier than thinking, easier than feeling." He turned the hat in his hand, studying the sweat-stained brim. "Calder gave me purpose when I didn't have any. Gave me a mission, a place to belong. And for a while, that was enough." "What changed?" "You." He looked up and met her eyes. "Watching them drag you out of that lodge. Watching Calder look at you like you were a thing he owned. I saw my daughter. Saw what could have happened to her if she'd lived, if men like us had come to our town instead of fever." He exhaled slowly. "I realized I'd become the thing I would have killed to protect her from." Kaia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she picked up the jerky he'd offered and took a bite, chewing slowly. "My father used to say that a man who realizes he's lost is already halfway to finding himself again," she said. "But the other half is harder. Realizing you're lost is nothing compared to choosing a different path." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Choosing a different path?" "I don't know yet. Maybe you're just running from consequences. Maybe you'll regret this tomorrow and try to take me back for a reward." She took another bite, her eyes never leaving his. "Or maybe you'll actually follow through. Time will tell." "Fair enough." They ate in silence while the canyon walls caught the rising sun and turned gold. The horses cropped at sparse grass, their breathing settling into normal rhythms. Somewhere overhead, a hawk cried out, the sound echoing off stone. Elias knew they should keep moving, but exhaustion was starting to cloud his judgment. He'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, and Kaia looked ready to fall over. Rest now or collapse later. Neither option was good, but one was necessary. "We sleep in shifts," he said, 2 hours each. "I'll take first watch." Kaia didn't argue. Okay. She found a patch of sandy ground beneath the overhang, wrapped herself in a blanket from his bedroll, and was asleep in minutes. Her face relaxed in sleep, making her look younger, more vulnerable. The bruises stood out darker against her skin, and Elias felt a fresh wave of anger at Webb, at Calder, at himself. He positioned himself where he could see both ends of the canyon and settled in to wait. The sun climbed higher, warming the stone, and birds began their morning songs. It was peaceful in a way that felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. 2 hours passed slowly. When he woke Kaia, she came alert immediately. No grogginess or confusion, just instant awareness. She took his position while he found his own spot to sleep, though he didn't think he'd be able to. His mind was too active, cycling through scenarios, planning routes, calculating odds. But fatigue pulled him under anyway, dragging him into dreams of Sarah laughing as she ran through a field of wildflowers, always just out of reach no matter how fast he ran. He woke to Kaia's hand on his shoulder and her voice urgent in his ear. "Riders, coming from the south." Elias was on his feet instantly, sleep falling away like shed skin. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the canyon mouth where Kaia stood pressed against the rock wall, peering around the edge. In the distance, maybe 2 miles out, a group of riders moved across the grassland. Even without field glasses, Elias could count 8 men. Not Calder's full force, which meant the colonel had split his men to cover more ground. "They're tracking us," Kaia said. "Yeah." Elias watched the riders shift direction slightly, angling toward the canyon. "River's with them. He'll have found our trail at the last stream crossing." "The guide? The half-blood?" "Best tracker I've ever seen. If he's leading them, they'll find us." Kaia's hand dropped to the knife at her belt, the only weapon she had. "Then we fight." 8 against 2? That's not a fight, that's suicide. Elias pulled back from the edge, mind racing. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before they reach the canyon mouth. If we're still here when they arrive, we're done." "The horses are tired. We can't outrun them." "No, but we can outsmart them." He turned to look deeper into the canyon, where it narrowed and twisted before climbing toward higher ground. Canyon splits about a mile up. Left fork leads to a box canyon, dead end. Right fork climbs to a ridge trail. If we can make them think we went left, we buy ourselves time. How? Leave signs, broken branches, disturbed ground, maybe a piece of cloth caught on a bush. Make it obvious enough that they'll follow without questioning. He was already moving, gathering their gear, saddling the horses. Then we take the right fork and pray they don't figure it out until we're long gone. Kaia helped him pack, her movements quick and efficient. And if they do figure it out, then we'd better be ready to fight after all. They led the horses deeper into the canyon, moving as fast as the terrain allowed. The walls closed in, the path becoming rockier, more treacherous. Elias kept an eye on the ground, memorizing the route so he could backtrack and plant false signs. When they reached the split, he sent Kaia up the right fork with both horses, while he worked on creating the deception. He broke branches at chest height, scraped boot heels in soft dirt, and finally tore a strip from his shirt and wedged it into a thorn bush where it would catch the eye. Not too obvious, just obvious enough. Then he scrambled up the right fork, erasing his tracks as he went, using a pine branch to sweep away boot prints and disturb the natural pattern of the ground. It wouldn't fool River for long, but it might buy them the minutes they needed. The right fork climbed steeply, the path switching back on itself as it rose toward the ridge. Kaia waited with the horses at the first switchback, her face tight with tension. "Will it work?" she asked. "We'll know soon enough." They kept climbing, leading the horses when the trail got too steep to ride. Elias's legs burned and his lungs ached in the thin air, but he pushed through it. Behind them, somewhere below, 8 men were hunting them with orders to bring Kaia back and probably kill him on sight. They reached the ridge as the sun hit its zenith, the temperature climbing into the 70s despite the altitude. From here they could see for miles, rolling grassland to the south, forested mountains to the north, and far to the west, peaks still white with snow. Elias found a spot where they could watch the canyon below without being visible from the ground. He pulled out his field glasses and focused on the canyon mouth. The riders appeared minutes later, River in the lead. They paused at the entrance, and Elias watched the guide dismount and study the ground. Even from this distance, he could read the man's body language. The careful examination, the slow walk forward, the hand signals to the men behind him. River led them into the canyon, following the trail Elias and Kaia had left. The group moved cautiously, weapons ready, expecting ambush. When they reached the split, River stopped for a long time, examining both forks. "Come on," Elias muttered. "Take the bait." River walked a few yards up the left fork, then came back and studied the right. Elias held his breath. This was the moment. If the guide saw through the deception, they'd have to run again with even less of a head start. Finally, River pointed left and remounted his horse. The group followed him into the box canyon. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Let's go." They mounted up and rode north along the ridge. putting distance between themselves and the pursuit. The trail was narrow and exposed, the drop-off steep enough that one wrong step would send horse and rider tumbling. But it was the fastest route, and speed mattered more than safety right now. Kaia rode in silence, her attention split between the trail and the landscape around them. She sat straighter now, more alert, and Elias realized she was starting to recognize the country. "You know this area," he said. "My people hunt these mountains. That peak—" She pointed to a distinctive formation to the northwest. "We call it Stone Grandfather. There's a valley beyond it where elk gather in summer." Her voice softened. "My father took me there when I was 12, taught me to track, to move silent, to read the land." "Is that where you're headed? Back to your people?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful, controlled. "There are no people left to go back to. You killed most of them. The survivors scattered." She looked at him. "I'm alone now." The words hung between them, heavy with accusation and truth. Elias wanted to apologize, to say something that would make it better, but there was nothing to say. Sorry didn't resurrect the dead or rebuild burned lodges or undo trauma. "There's a trading post 3 days north," he said instead. "Fort Benson. You could make it there, get supplies, figure out your next move." "And you?" "I keep running, I guess. Put as much distance between me and Calder as possible. Maybe head to Canada, start over somewhere they've never heard of Colonel Rhett Calder or the things we did. Running doesn't change what you've done." "No," he agreed, "but maybe it stops me from doing more of it." They rode until sunset, stopping only to rest the horses and refill their canteens from streams that ran clear and cold. The terrain shifted from high ridge to rolling foothills to dense pine forest where the air smelled of resin and earth. They saw deer, a family of black bears fishing in a river, and once the distant silhouette of what might have been a mountain lion. As darkness fell, they made camp in a clearing surrounded by old-growth timber. No fire. Too risky with pursuit still behind them. They ate cold rations and shared water, sitting on opposite sides of the clearing like strangers forced together by circumstance, which Elias supposed was exactly what they were. "Tell me about your daughter," Kaia said suddenly. "Not how she died. Tell me who she was." The request caught him off guard. He sat silent for a moment, remembering. She was curious about everything, always asking questions, always wanting to know why things worked the way they did. Drove her mother crazy sometimes, all that talking. He smiled despite himself. She loved horses. Used to beg me to take her riding, and she'd sit in front of me in the saddle, so small I could hold her with one arm. She'd lean back against me and point out clouds, make up stories about what shapes they were making. She sounds wonderful. She was. The smile faded. I wasted so much time. Time I could have spent with her, watching her grow up. Instead, I was off fighting a war that didn't matter nearly as much as being her father. Kaia pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. My mother died when I was 8. Sickness that the white man's medicine couldn't cure. My father raised me alone, taught me everything he knew. He used to say that time spent teaching your child is never wasted because it lives on after you're gone. She paused. He was right. Everything I know, everything I am, that's him, still alive in me. Your father sounds like a good man. He was, until Calder's raiders came to our hunting grounds and murdered him for being in the wrong place. Her voice went flat. They didn't even take anything, just killed him and left his body for the scavengers. We found him 3 days later. Elias felt the weight of that settling into his chest. I'm sorry. Sorry. She tested the word. Everyone's sorry after the killing is done. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead. Sorry doesn't rebuild what's burned. Sorry is just something people say so they can feel better about the terrible things they've done. You're right. I know I'm right. She stood abruptly, wrapping the blanket around herself. I'm going to sleep. Wake me if someone tries to kill us. She moved to the far side of the clearing and lay down with her back to him, ending the conversation. Elias sat alone in the darkness, listening to the forest breathe around him, wind in the pines, water over stones, the distant call of an owl hunting. He thought about Sarah, about Kaia's father, about all the people he'd helped kill in the name of following orders. The weight of it felt impossible to carry, but he carried it anyway because what else could he do? Eventually, he forced himself to lie down, rifle within reach, and tried to sleep. Dawn came gray and cold, bringing rain that started as drizzle and built to a steady downpour. They rode through it, miserable and soaked, the trail turning to mud that sucked at the horses' hooves. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 yards, the world becoming a gray blur of rain and mist. By midday, Kaia was shivering despite her blanket, her lips tinged blue. Elias knew they needed shelter before hypothermia became a problem. He guided them east, following a creek until they found a rocky overhang that offered some protection from the rain. They dismounted and led the horses under the overhang, crowding into a space barely large enough for all of them. Kaia's teeth chattered, and when Elias touched her hand, her skin was ice cold. "We need to get you warm," he said. "Fire? Too risky. Smoke would be visible for miles, and Calder's men are still out there." He pulled off his coat despite being soaked himself. "Here, extra layer." She didn't argue, just wrapped it around herself on top of the blanket, but Elias could see it wasn't enough. Her shivering was getting worse, her movements sluggish. He made a decision that he knew she probably wouldn't like, but that might save her life. He sat down beside her and pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her, sharing body heat. She stiffened immediately. "What are you—" "Staying warm, you're hypothermic. This is the fastest way to raise your core temperature without fire." He kept his voice clinical, matter of fact. "If you've got a better idea, I'm listening." For a moment he thought she'd pull away, but then the shivering got worse and practicality won out over pride. She leaned into him, letting his warmth seep into her. They sat like that for an hour while the rain pounded down and the temperature dropped. Gradually, Kaia's shivering lessened, her breathing steadied. She didn't speak, and neither did Elias, just two people trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to kill them. "Why did you become a soldier?" she asked finally, her voice quiet. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. The country was tearing itself apart, and I thought I could help put it back together. He stared out at the rain. Turns out war doesn't put anything together, it just breaks things into smaller pieces. "Then why did you keep fighting after the war ended?" "Because I didn't know how to be anything else. Being a soldier was simple. Someone told you who the enemy was. You killed them. You moved on to the next fight. Didn't have to think about right or wrong, just orders and obedience." He shifted slightly, trying to get more comfortable on the hard ground. "Calder offered me that simplicity when I needed it most, gave me a purpose when I'd lost mine. And now? Now I don't know what I am. Not a soldier anymore. Not sure I can call myself a good man after the things I've done. Just someone trying to figure out how to live with himself." Kaia was quiet for a long time. Then, "My people believe that a man is not defined by his worst moment, but by what he does after it. The path to redemption is long and hard, but it exists for those willing to walk it. You think redemption is possible for someone like me? I think trying is better than not trying. The rest," she shrugged against him, "that's between you and your conscience." The rain continued through the afternoon and into evening. They stayed huddled under the overhang, sharing warmth and silence, two people from different worlds forced to rely on each other. When darkness fell and the rain finally stopped, they risked a small fire, just enough to dry their clothes and cook some proper food. Kaia watched him work, her eyes reflecting firelight. "You know they'll never stop hunting us," she said. "I know. Calder won't let this go. You betrayed him, took something he wanted. Men like that, they can't tolerate defiance." "I know that too." Elias poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the night. "But running is still better than staying." "Is it?" She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Where does running end? How far do you have to go before you stop looking over your shoulder?" "I don't know, but I'd rather die free than live as Calder's dog." Kaia studied him, and something shifted in her expression, not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "Then we keep running. Together. At least until we reach somewhere safe." "Together," Elias agreed and felt something loosen in his chest. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Wasn't just a deserter fleeing consequences. He was part of something, an unlikely alliance, maybe even the start of something like friendship. They finished their meal and banked the fire, settling in for the night with one person on watch while the other slept. The forest around them was full of sounds, animals moving through the underbrush, wind in the trees, the distant howl of wolves. Elias took first watch, sitting with his rifle across his knees, scanning the darkness for threats. Kaia slept fitfully, murmuring in her own language, dreaming of things he could only guess at. He thought about the future, how long they could stay ahead of Calder, where they could go that would be safe, what came after survival when survival was all you'd focused on for days. No answers came. Just more questions, stacking up like debts he couldn't pay. But for now, in this moment, they were alive and free and moving forward. And maybe that was enough. The wolves found them on the 6th day. Elias heard them first, distant howling that echoed through the canyon they were traversing, a sound that made the horses nervous and sent ice down his spine. Kaia heard it too and went still in her saddle, listening with the intensity of someone who understood what those calls meant. "How many?" Elias asked. "At least 6. Maybe more." She twisted to look behind them. "They're tracking something." "Us?" "Probably." She urged her horse forward, picking up the pace. Wolves don't usually hunt humans unless they're desperate or wounded. But if Calder's men wounded one of their pack, they might follow our scent thinking we're easier prey than whatever hurt them. They pushed the horses harder, but the terrain was working against them. Loose shale that slid underfoot, narrow passages between rock walls, steep climbs that forced them to dismount and lead the animals. The howling continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always there, a constant reminder that they weren't alone in this wilderness. By late afternoon, they reached a point where the canyon opened into a wider valley. A river ran through it, swollen with snowmelt, moving fast and angry over rocks that jutted up like broken teeth. On the far side, thick forest climbed toward mountains that still wore caps of white. "We need to cross," Kaia said, studying the water. "Put the river between us and whatever's following." Elias surveyed the crossing points. The river was maybe 40 feet wide, the current strong enough to knock a man off his feet. The horses could probably swim it, but the cold water and the current made it dangerous. "There," Kaia pointed to a spot upstream where the river widened and slowed slightly, flowing over what looked like a gravel bar. "It's shallower. We cross there." They approached the river carefully, the horses skittish from the sound of rushing water and the lingering scent of wolves on the wind. Kaia went first, urging her bay gelding into the current. The water rose quickly to the horse's chest, then higher, until Kaia had to lift her legs to keep them dry. The current pushed against them, trying to sweep them downstream, but the gelding was strong and kept its footing, lunging forward through the water. Elias followed, his buckskin mare snorting in protest, but obeying the pressure of his legs. The cold hit him like a physical blow, snowmelt water that felt like it had teeth, biting through his clothes and stealing his breath. The current was stronger than it looked, pulling at the mare's legs, trying to drag them sideways. He leaned forward, giving the horse her head, trusting her instincts. They were halfway across when the mare stumbled. Her front hoof caught between rocks, and she went down hard, throwing Elias into the water. The current grabbed him immediately, pulling him under, tumbling him over rocks that slammed into his ribs, his shoulders, his head. He fought to surface, lungs burning, and managed to get his face above water long enough to gasp air before going under again. Something caught his arm, Kaia's hand, her grip iron strong. She'd somehow gotten ahead of him in the current and braced herself against a boulder, using it as an anchor while she hauled him toward the bank. He got his feet under him and pushed, working with her, and together they dragged themselves out of the river onto muddy ground. Elias lay gasping, coughing up water, his whole body shaking from cold and shock. His rifle was gone, lost to the river. His hat, too. Everything in his pockets was soaked. "Can you stand?" Kaia's voice was urgent. He nodded and forced himself up. His ribs screamed in protest, bruised or broken, he couldn't tell. But he could move. The mare had made it to shore downstream, standing on shaky legs, her eyes wide with fear. The bay gelding stood nearby, snorting and tossing his head. "We need to move," Kaia said. "Get distance before hypothermia sets in." But before they could reach the horses, the wolves appeared. 6 of them materialized from the forest on the far side of the river, lean and gray and moving with the coordinated grace of pack hunters. They stopped at the water's edge, watching the humans with eyes that reflected the late afternoon sun like coins. The lead wolf was massive, easily 130 pounds, with a scarred muzzle and one ear that had been torn half off in some past fight. It studied them across the water, calculating odds, weighing hunger against risk. Elias's hand dropped to his pistol, still in its holster, still there despite the river. He drew it slowly, water dripping from the barrel, and thumbed back the hammer. "Don't," Kaia said quietly. "If you shoot one, the others will come. Wolves are smart. They know gunfire means danger. If we just back away slowly, they might let us go. And if they don't, then we fight. But let's try walking away first." They moved backward toward the horses, never taking their eyes off the wolves. The pack followed along the opposite bank, paralleling their movement, maintaining the distance. The lead wolf made a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, and the others answered. Kaia reached her horse first and swung up into the saddle in one smooth motion. Elias grabbed the mare's reins, his hands shaking so badly from cold he could barely hold on, and pulled himself up. His ribs protested violently, but he ignored them. "Ride," Kaia said. They kicked the horses into a gallop, plunging into the forest on the north side of the river. Behind them, the wolves howled, a sound of frustration, or maybe just farewell. Elias didn't look back to see if they were following. He just rode, bent low over the mare's neck, letting her pick the path while he focused on staying conscious through the pain and the cold. They rode for an hour before Kaia called a halt in a clearing surrounded by dense pines. Elias half fell from the saddle, his legs barely holding him upright. His teeth were chattering so hard he couldn't speak, and his fingers had gone numb. Kaia was beside him instantly, her hands on his shoulders, steadying him. "We need fire. Now! You're going into shock!" She worked with fierce efficiency, gathering dry wood from beneath low-hanging branches where the rain hadn't reached, building a fire pit with rocks, using flint and steel from her pack to start a blaze. Within minutes, flames were crackling, throwing heat and light into the gathering dusk. "Strip," she ordered. "Everything wet comes off." Elias tried to protest, but his jaw wouldn't work right. Kaia didn't wait for permission. She pulled off his coat, his shirt, peeling away soaked fabric while he stood there shaking. When she got to his ribs, she paused, fingers gentle on skin that was already turning purple with bruises. "Broken?" he managed to ask through chattering teeth. "Cracked, maybe. Hard to tell." She pulled a blanket from her pack and wrapped it around him, then pushed him toward the fire. "Sit. Get warm." He sank down as close to the flames as he could without setting himself on fire, feeling the heat slowly seeping back into his bones. Kaia stripped off her own wet outer layers and hung everything on branches near the fire to dry, then sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. They stayed like that while darkness fell and the fire burned, neither speaking, just existing in the small circle of warmth and light while the wilderness breathed around them. Elias's shaking gradually subsided, replaced by an exhaustion so profound he could barely keep his eyes open. "Thank you," he said finally, "for pulling me out. You would have done the same." "Maybe, but you actually did it." He looked at her profile, lit by firelight, bruises fading now but still visible. "Why? Would have been easier to let me drown. You could have taken both horses, all the supplies, been free of me." Kaia was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "When I was 14, I fell through ice on a frozen lake. The water was so cold I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was drowning, and all I could feel was anger. Anger that this was how I was going to die, alone and cold and stupid for walking on ice I knew was too thin." She paused. "My father pulled me out, risked his own life going onto that ice to save mine. Later, I asked him why, when it would have been safer to get a rope or find help. He said that when someone is drowning, you don't calculate risk, you just act. Because if you wait, even for good reasons, they're gone. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Her voice went soft. "And you killed him." The words hung between them, brutal and true. Elias felt them like a knife between his ribs, sharper than the physical pain. "Not me personally," he said, then stopped, because that was a coward's answer. "But my people, men I rode with, orders I followed." He met her eyes. "So yeah, I killed him. I killed a lot of people who didn't deserve it." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve the truth. Because I'm tired of hiding from what I've done. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands dangling between them. I can't undo any of it. Can't bring back your father or my daughter or anyone else who died because of choices I made. But I can stop making those choices. I can be better than what I was. Kaia studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she stood and walked to where she'd hung her shirt to dry, testing the fabric. Still damp, but better than nothing. She pulled it on and turned back to face him. My father also used to say that a man who acknowledges his debts is halfway to paying them. The other half is the work. The long, hard work of becoming someone different. She sat back down, closer this time. So do the work, Elias. Prove that saving me wasn't just running from consequences. Prove it meant something. How? By living like you deserve the second chance you're getting. By making choices that honor the people you couldn't save. She pulled her blanket tighter. And by helping me survive long enough to make sure Calder never does to anyone else what he did to my people. Elias looked at her sharply. You want revenge. I want justice. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, they look pretty similar. Revenge is personal. Justice is necessary. Her eyes were hard now, reflecting firelight like the wolves had. Calder won't stop. You know that. He'll keep raiding, keep killing, keep taking whatever he wants until someone stops him. And if we don't do it, who will? The army? They don't care about dead Indians or burned settlements out here on the frontier. The law? There's no law this far from civilization. She was right, and Elias knew it. But the idea of turning around, of actively hunting Calder instead of running, that felt like suicide. We wouldn't stand a chance, he said. 2 people against 40 trained killers? We'd be dead before we got close. Maybe. Or maybe we get smart about it. Use what we know, pick them off slowly, turn them against each other. Kaia leaned forward, intensity radiating from her. You know how Calder thinks. You know his patterns, his weaknesses. And I know this land, every trail, every hiding place, every sacred ground where the spirits still hold power. Sacred ground? She smiled, and there was something fierce in it. There are places in these mountains where the old laws still apply. Places where violence carries consequences that even men like Calder can't escape. If we can lure him there... She let the sentence hang, pregnant with possibility. Elias wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but he'd seen too much in his life to be certain about what was real and what wasn't. He'd stood on battlefields where the dead seemed to walk among the living. He'd heard voices on the wind that sounded like warnings. He'd felt the weight of places that remembered blood. What kind of sacred ground? He asked. My people call it the Circle of Judgment. It's a natural amphitheater in the mountains, ringed by standing stones that were old when my ancestors first came to this land. The elders say that any conflict brought into that circle must be resolved by the old law. Single combat, no weapons beyond what you can carry, fight until one yields or dies. She met his eyes. No one who's entered that circle with murder in their heart has ever left it alive. The land itself demands justice. And you believe that? I've seen it. When I was 16, 2 warriors from different tribes met there to settle a blood feud. The one who'd committed the original wrong refused to yield, refused to admit fault. He was the better fighter, stronger, faster. Should have won easily. Her voice dropped. But the earth opened beneath him, swallowed him whole. The other warrior walked away. Elias wanted to call it folklore, wanted to find the rational explanation. But something in Kaia's voice, absolute certainty, the tone of someone reporting facts rather than legends, made him pause. You want to lure Calder into this circle, he said slowly. Challenge him to single combat under these old laws. Yes. He'll never accept. He's got 40 men with rifles. Why would he fight fair? Because men like Calder, men who've built their whole identity on being strong, being feared, they can't resist a direct challenge to their authority, especially not in front of their men. She smiled grimly. You said it yourself. He hunts deserters not because he's angry, but because he can't let anyone think desertion is an option. Well, I'll give him an option he can't refuse. Face me alone, prove he's the warrior he claims to be, or look weak in front of everyone who follows him. It was insane. Brilliant and insane. The kind of plan that would either work perfectly or get them both killed. And if the sacred ground thing is just a story, Elias asked, If it's just rocks and dirt and nothing more, then we make sure I'm the better fighter. Kaia's hand moved to the knife at her belt, her fingers comfortable on the hilt. Either way, Calder answers for what he's done. Elias stared into the fire, watching flames dance and shift, turning possibilities over in his mind. Running meant living with the knowledge that Calder would continue destroying lives. Fighting meant probably dying, but at least dying for something that mattered. There's a third option, he said. We could keep going north, cross into Canada, disappear. Is that what you want? To spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when he'll catch up? No? The answer came without hesitation. But I don't want you dead either. Why do you care? Because he stopped searching for words. Because you saved my life. Because you're giving me a chance to be better than what I was. Because somewhere in the last week, you stopped being the enemy's daughter and started being, what? A friend, maybe. The first real friend I've had since before the war. Kaia looked away, but not before he saw something shift in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Then help me do this, she said quietly. Help me make sure no one else loses their father to Calder's ambition, and maybe we both get something out of it. What would you get? Peace, closure, the knowledge that I honored my father's memory by stopping the man who killed him. She turned back to him. What would you get? Elias thought about Sarah, about all the people he'd failed to protect, about the man he used to be before war and loss had hollowed him out. Maybe redemption, he said, or at least a chance at it. They sat in silence while the fire burned low and the forest settled into its nighttime rhythms. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The horses shifted and snorted, content now that they were fed and rested. Finally, Elias spoke. If we do this, and that's a big if, we do it smart. No rushing in, no heroic last stands. We plan, we prepare, and we make damn sure the odds are in our favor before we make a move. Agreed. And if at any point it looks like suicide, we abort, live to fight another day. Kaia hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. Then I'm in. He offered his hand across the space between them. Partners? She looked at his hand for a long moment, then took it. Her grip was strong, calloused, the handshake of someone who'd worked hard her whole life. Partners, she said. They spent the next 2 days moving carefully through the mountains, staying off main trails, avoiding areas where they might encounter other travelers. Kaia taught Elias how to read the land the way her people did, how to find water by watching where birds flew in the evening, how to identify edible plants, how to move through the forest without disturbing the natural patterns that would alert predators to their presence. In return, Elias taught her about Calder's tactics, his patterns, the way he thought. The colonel was methodical, patient when he needed to be, but ruthless when opportunity presented itself. He valued loyalty above all else and punished betrayal with a creativity that bordered on sadistic. He'll have sent multiple search parties, Elias explained as they sat examining a hand-drawn map of the region. Won't put all his resources into one pursuit. He'll grid the area, assign each team a sector, work systematically. How long before he gives up? He won't. Not until he finds us or something more important demands his attention. Elias traced a route on the map. But he's got limited resources. 40 men sounds like a lot, but spread across this much territory, working in teams, he can't cover everything. So we use that against him, draw him out, make him commit resources to the wrong place, then hit him where he's weak. That's one approach, but it's risky. If we're wrong about his patterns, we walk right into an ambush. Kaia studied the map, her finger following the terrain features. The circle of judgment is here, in the painted canyon. 3 days hard ride from Calder's camp. If we can get word to him, challenge him publicly, he'll come. His pride won't let him refuse. How do we get word to him without getting caught? She smiled. We use his own men against him. Find one of the search parties, leave a message they can't ignore, then disappear before they can respond. It was risky, but it might work. Elias found himself nodding, his tactical mind engaging with the problem. We'd need to scout their positions first. Identify a small group isolated from reinforcements. There's a pass about a day's ride south. Only good route through this part of the mountains. If they're searching systematically, they'll have to come through there eventually. Then that's where we wait. They broke camp at dawn the next morning and headed south, moving with purpose now, instead of just fleeing. The shift in mindset was subtle but significant. They were hunters now instead of prey, and Elias felt something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Direction. The sense that he was moving towards something instead of just running away. The pass Kaia had mentioned was a narrow defile between two cliff faces, the kind of terrain that made tacticians nervous because it offered no escape if you got caught in it. But it also funneled traffic, forced people to come through single file where they could be watched. They set up observation posts on both sides of the pass, taking turns watching while the other rested. For 2 days, they saw nothing, just wildlife and wind and the slow movement of clouds across an endless sky. Then, on the third morning, Kaia whistled softly from her position above. Elias scrambled up to join her and followed her pointing finger. 6 riders moved through the pass below, Calder's men, recognizable by their formation and the way they carried themselves. Webb was among them, riding point, his face still bearing scars from where Kaia had slashed him during her capture. "That's our chance," Kaia whispered. "What's the message?" She pulled out a piece of cloth, torn from the shirt she'd been wearing when they took her, stained with her blood from the beating. She'd kept it, Elias realized, for exactly this purpose. "I'll write it in my language. Webb won't be able to read it, but he'll take it back to Calder, and Calder will find someone who can translate." She pulled out a piece of charcoal from the fire kit and began marking symbols on the cloth. "I'm challenging him. Single combat, the circle of judgment, 7 days from now at sunset. If he's truly the warrior he claims to be, he'll come alone. If he's a coward, he'll send his men to do his killing for him. He'll see through it. He'll know it's a trap. Of course he will, but he'll come anyway." She finished writing and held up the cloth. Men like Calder, their greatest strength is also their weakness. They can't resist proving they're the most dangerous person in any room. They waited until the riders had passed through the narrows, then descended and left the marked cloth tied to a branch at eye level where it couldn't be missed. Beside it, Kaia placed 3 eagle feathers, arranged in a pattern that Elias didn't understand but that clearly meant something. "What do the feathers mean?" he asked as they climbed back to their hiding spot. "Challenge, honor, death." She settled into position to watch. It's the old way of declaring blood feud. Anyone who sees it will know what it means. They didn't have to wait long. The riders came back through the pass less than an hour later, having completed their sweep. Webb saw the cloth immediately and called a halt. He dismounted, examined it carefully, then shouted something to his men. Even from a distance, Elias could see the anger in Webb's body language, sharp, aggressive movements as he untied the cloth and feathers. He held them up, turning in a slow circle like he was searching for whoever had left them. "Come on," Kaia breathed. "Take the bait." Webb remounted and kicked his horse into a gallop, heading south toward Calder's camp. The other riders followed, leaving the pass empty again. Kaia turned to Elias, her eyes bright with fierce satisfaction. "It's done. 7 days from now, we end this." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of what they'd set in motion settling onto his shoulders. 7 days to prepare. 7 days to make peace with the possibility of dying. 7 days to become someone worthy of the second chance he'd been given. "Then we'd better make sure we're ready," he said. They descended from the heights and disappeared into the wilderness, 2 figures moving through a landscape that had witnessed countless conflicts and would witness one more before the season turned. The die was cast. The challenge issued. And somewhere to the south, Colonel Rhett Calder was receiving a message that would force his hand and set in motion a confrontation that had been building since the first time he decided that power mattered more than humanity. 7 days. The journey to the Circle of Judgment took them through country that seemed to grow more ancient with each passing mile. The mountains here were older, worn down by time into shapes that looked almost deliberate. Towering formations that resembled sentinels standing watch, caves that opened like mouths in cliff faces, streams that ran over stones polished smooth by centuries of water. Kaia led them along paths that didn't appear on any map Elias had ever seen, trails that wound through narrow defiles and across ridges where the wind howled with a voice that sounded almost human. She moved with increasing confidence, her posture straightening, her eyes brighter. This was her land, Elias realized, her people's territory. Every rock and tree held meaning, carried history. On the fourth day, they encountered the first of the standing stones. It rose from the ground like a broken tooth, easily 15 feet tall, covered in markings so weathered that Elias couldn't tell if they were writing or just the work of wind and rain. Kaia dismounted and approached it on foot, her movements careful, reverential. She placed her palm flat against the stone and closed her eyes, lips moving in words Elias couldn't hear. When she returned to her horse, her expression had changed, determined now, almost serene. "We're close," she said. "The circle is just beyond the next valley." They made camp that night in a grove of aspens that whispered and shook even when the air seemed still. Elias built a fire while Kaia disappeared into the forest, returning an hour later with plants he didn't recognize, roots, leaves, flowers that gave off a sharp medicinal smell when she crushed them. "What's that for?" he asked. "Preparation." She began grinding the plants together in a small bowl made from a hollow stone. Warriors who enter the circle traditionally fast for 3 days and prepare their spirits. "We don't have 3 days, but we can still honor the forms." "You really believe in all this? The sacred ground, the old laws?" "I've seen what happens to people who don't believe and enter the circle anyway." She mixed water with the crushed plants, creating a thick paste. "Belief isn't required. The land doesn't care what you think. It only cares what you do." She offered him the bowl. The paste looked like mud and smelled worse. "What am I supposed to do with that?" "Mark yourself. It's made from plants that grow only in sacred places. They're supposed to strengthen resolve, clarify purpose." She dipped her fingers in the paste and drew 3 lines across her forehead, then continued down her cheeks in patterns that looked ceremonial. In the old days, warriors would cover themselves in these marks before entering combat. Elias took the bowl, skeptical but willing. He drew a single line across his forehead, feeling foolish. "More than that," Kaia said, "this isn't decoration. It's armor for your spirit." Under her direction, he added more lines across his cheekbones, down his neck, along his arms where his shirt didn't cover. The paste was cold against his skin and dried quickly, pulling tight. He could smell the plants, sage and something sharper, almost bitter. When they finished, they sat across the fire from each other. 2 warriors painted for battle in a tradition older than either of their peoples, preparing to face an enemy who believed in nothing but power. "Tell me about the circle," Elias said. "What should I expect?" "It's a natural amphitheater, perfectly round, maybe 100 feet across. Standing stones ring the perimeter, 9 of them, each taller than a man. The ground inside is bare earth, packed hard from centuries of use. When you stand in the center, you can hear echoes of every word spoken, every breath taken." She paused, firelight catching in her eyes. "My people believe the stones remember, that every conflict ever resolved there is still present somehow, watching, weighing. And the rules? Single combat, no firearms, only weapons you can make or carry by hand. Fight until one yields or dies. Once you enter the circle, you can't leave until the conflict is resolved." She met his eyes. "And the land itself judges. If you enter with dishonor in your heart, the circle knows, and it punishes." "How?" "Different ways. Sometimes the ground opens, sometimes the stones fall. I saw a man once who tried to use poison. He collapsed screaming before he could even reach his opponent, his own poison burning through his veins like fire." Her voice went quiet. "The circle demands truth. You can't lie there, can't hide what you really are. Everything gets stripped away until only the essential remains." Elias absorbed this, trying to separate folklore from fact and finding the line too blurred to distinguish. He'd seen enough inexplicable things in his life to know that dismissing something just because it sounded impossible was foolish. "If Calder comes," he said, "he'll come with his men. He won't honor the single combat rule. Then his men will have to watch from outside the stones. The circle won't allow interference. Anyone who tries to enter during a sanctioned combat will face the same judgment as someone who enters with murder in their heart." She leaned forward. "But you're right to worry. Calder won't play fair if he can help it. That's why we need leverage." "What kind of leverage?" Kaia pulled something from her pack, a small leather pouch that clinked softly. She opened it and poured the contents into her palm. Gold coins, at least a dozen of them, catching firelight. "Where did you get those?" Elias asked. "Took them from your saddlebags while you were sleeping. Day 3, I think." She said it matter-of-factly, without apology. Figured if I was going to trust you with my life, I should know what you were carrying. Elias felt a flash of anger, then grudging respect. She'd been smart, careful, thinking ahead even when she'd seemed to be going along with his plans. What are you planning to do with my money? Buy insurance. She returned the coins to the pouch. There's a band of Crow warriors camped 2 valleys over. I saw their smoke yesterday. They have no love for white raiders, especially Calder's men. If I can convince them to come to the circle to witness what happens there, Calder's men won't dare interfere. They'll be outnumbered and facing warriors who know this land better than they ever will. Will they help us? After what happened to your people? The Crow and the Blackfoot aren't allies, but we share enemies, and gold speaks louder than old grudges. She tucked the pouch away. I'll go tomorrow at first light. You stay here, rest, prepare. I'll be back before sunset. That's not safe. Going alone. Safer than you coming with me. You're white. A raider. They'd kill you on sight and ask questions. Never. She stood, final and decisive. This is my task. Trust me to handle it. Elias wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. She was right. His presence would make things worse, not better. And somewhere in the last week, he'd started trusting her judgment as much as his own. Be careful, he said. Always am. She left at dawn, riding the bay gelding and carrying the pouch of gold coins. Elias watched her disappear into the morning mist and felt the absence like a physical thing. He'd gotten used to her presence, he realized, used to having someone to talk to plan with, to trust. The day passed slowly. He cleaned his pistol, checked and rechecked his knife, practiced drawing both until the movements were smooth and automatic. He gathered stones from the stream and built a small cairn, a memorial to Sarah, to Kaia's father, to all the people who died because of choices he'd made or failed to make. As he placed the last stone, he spoke aloud to the empty forest. I can't undo what's been done. Can't bring you back, but I can try to make sure it means something, try to be better than I was. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Kaia returned as the sun touched the western peaks, riding hard, the horse lathered with sweat. She slid from the saddle and grinned, actually grinned, the first time Elias had seen genuine joy on her face. They're coming, she said. 20 warriors. They'll be at the circle tomorrow by noon. What did you tell them? The truth. That a white colonel murdered their trading partners, that he's terrorizing the territory, that he needs to answer for his crimes. She unsaddled the horse, her movements quick and energized. I also told them that if they witness his defeat, they'll have proof that the old ways still hold power, that sacred ground can still bring justice when the white man's law fails. And the gold? Payment for their time and the risk of confronting armed raiders. They drive a hard bargain, but it was worth every coin. She turned to face him. This is really happening, Elias. Tomorrow, we face Calder. Tomorrow, we end this. That night, neither of them slept much. They sat by the fire talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Her childhood, his war years, the 1,000 small moments that had led them both to this point. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Elias found himself studying her face in the firelight, memorizing details in case tomorrow went wrong. What will you do? He asked. After, assuming we survive. Find what's left of my people. Help them rebuild. Make sure the stories are told so what happened isn't forgotten. She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up. And you? I don't know. Haven't thought past tomorrow. He paused. Maybe find someplace quiet. Build something instead of destroying things. Learn to sleep through the night without dreaming about people I've killed. That sounds peaceful. Yeah, it does. He looked at her. You'd be welcome there, if you wanted, after you've done what you need to do for your people. She met his eyes, and something passed between them. Not quite a promise, but the possibility of one. A future that might exist if they survive the present. I'll think about it, she said softly. They reached the circle of judgment at mid-morning on the 7th day. Kaia hadn't exaggerated. The amphitheater was perfect. A natural bowl in the earth surrounded by 9 standing stones that rose like ancient guardians against the sky. The stones were massive, easily 20 feet tall, covered in markings that might have been writing or art or something else entirely. They were arranged in a perfect circle, and the space between them felt charged somehow, like the air before a lightning strike. The ground inside was bare earth, dark and hard-packed. No grass grew there, no moss, no lichen on the stones, just empty space that seemed to swallow sound and give back silence. Elias dismounted and approached the nearest stone, feeling the hairs on his arms rising. There was power here. He could feel it in his bones, in the rhythm of his heartbeat. Whether it was sacred or just psychological, he couldn't say, but it was real. "We wait here," Kaia said, positioning herself near the eastern stones. "The crow will arrive first, position themselves in the heights. Then Calder comes, and we see if he's truly the warrior he claims to be or just another bully with a gun." The crow warriors arrived at noon, moving silently through the forest and taking positions on the ridges overlooking the circle. Elias counted them, 20, as Kaia had promised, all armed with rifles and bows, their faces painted for war. Their leader, a man with gray streaking his braids and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, raised his hand in acknowledgement to Kaia. She returned the gesture, then settled in to wait. The afternoon stretched out, tension building with each passing hour. Elias checked his weapons repeatedly, unable to sit still, running through scenarios in his mind. Would Calder come alone as the challenge demanded? Would he try to rush them with his full force? Would he come at all, or had he seen through their plan and decided discretion was the better part of valor? As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Elias heard it, the sound of horses, many horses, moving through the forest. He stood, hand dropping to his pistol, every muscle tense. They emerged from the trees like ghosts solidifying, 40 riders, fully armed, spreading out in a semicircle around the northern edge of the circle. Calder rode at their center, sitting his roan gelding like a king surveying his domain, his eyes sweeping the scene with cold calculation. He saw the crow warriors on the ridges and smiled, saw Kaia standing near the stones and his smile widened. When his gaze landed on Elias, something flickered in his expression. Disappointment, maybe, or just confirmation of suspicions. "Lieutenant Vance," Calder called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I'd hoped the rumors were wrong. Hoped you'd died in that river crossing or been taken by wolves. But here you are, standing with the enemy. How the mighty have fallen." Elias stepped forward, moving to stand beside Kaia. "I'm not your lieutenant anymore, Colonel. Haven't been since the moment I realized what following your orders made me. A traitor, a deserter, a man who throws away honor for a piece of Indian trash." Calder dismounted, his movements deliberate, theatrical. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me? The time spent hunting you? The resources wasted? The example you've set for my men?" "Good," Elias said. "I hope every man who rides with you asks himself if he wants to end up like me, free of you and your poison." Calder's jaw tightened, the only sign that the words had landed. He turned his attention to Kaia, looking her up and down like livestock at auction. "And you, the sacred daughter, the Stormbringer." He took a step closer to the edge of the circle, but didn't enter it. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience, girl. If you'd just accepted your place quietly, none of this would have been necessary." "My place?" Kaia's voice was ice and fire. "You mean as your captive, your trophy, a symbol of your power?" She spat on the ground. "I am Kaia Redwin, daughter of Chief Tall Bear, warrior of the Blackfoot people. I bow to no man, least of all a murderer and coward like you." The insult hung in the air. Calder's men shifted uncomfortably, hands moving toward weapons. The crow warriors on the ridges raised their rifles slightly, a clear warning. The tension ratcheted higher, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Calder's face went very still, very cold. "Careful, girl. Insults have consequences." "Then accept my challenge." Kaia moved to the center of the circle, her movements fluid and confident. "Single combat. You and me. No guns, no interference. We settle this the old way under the old laws. If you win, I surrender. You can do whatever you want with me. But if I win," she let the sentence hang. "If you win, I'm supposed to just walk away? Forget this whole thing." Calder laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Why would I agree to that when I have 40 men and you have nothing? Because if you don't, everyone here sees you for what you really are, a coward who hides behind his men." Kaia's voice rang out clear and strong, because the crow warriors watching from the heights, will spread word across the territory that the great Colonel Calder was too afraid to face one woman in fair combat. Because your own men will wonder if you're truly the warrior you claim to be or just a bully with a gun. Webb shouted from the line of riders. Don't listen to her, Colonel. She's trying to manipulate you. Just give the order and we'll end this. But Calder held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Kaia, calculating odds, weighing options. Elias could practically see the thoughts moving behind those cold eyes. The strategic considerations, the political implications, the question of honor versus pragmatism. What are the terms? Calder asked finally. Traditional weapons only. Knife, tomahawk, club, whatever you can carry by hand. Fight until one of us yields or dies. No interference from anyone outside the circle. The Crow warriors ensure the rules are followed. Kaia pulled her knife from its sheath, the blade catching the late afternoon sun. Do you accept? Calder was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, that terrible, cold smile Elias knew too well. I accept, but with one addition to the terms. He gestured toward Elias. When I kill you, your white protector fights me next. 2 for the price of 1. No, Kaia said immediately. This is between you and me. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. Calder began removing his gun belt, handing it to Webb. You want your justice? You get it, but so do I. The traitor dies today, one way or another. Elias stepped forward. I accept. Kaia whirled to face him. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. This is my debt as much as yours. My chance to stand for something instead of just running away. He met her eyes. Let me help you finish this. She studied his face, searching for doubt or fear. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded once, sharp and final. Then we fight together, she said. One way or another. Calder stripped down to his shirt and pants, keeping only a large hunting knife and a tomahawk he pulled from his saddlebags. He entered the circle slowly, testing the ground, his movements those of a man who'd fought more battles than he could count. The old laws, he called out to the assembled witnesses. Single combat, no interference, fight until resolution. May the strongest survive. He took his position in the center of the circle, facing Kaia across 30 feet of bare earth. The standing stones seemed to lean in, watching. The air grew heavy, charged with something Elias couldn't name. Kaia moved to face him, her knife held low and ready, her stance balanced. She was smaller than Calder by at least 80 pounds, shorter by half a foot. On paper, she didn't stand a chance. But Elias had learned over the past week that paper didn't account for spirit, didn't measure determination or rage or the strength that came from fighting for something larger than yourself. The Crow leader raised his rifle and fired once into the air, the signal to begin. Calder moved first, rushing forward with surprising speed for a man his size, the tomahawk raised for a killing blow. Kaia sidestepped at the last instant, her knife flashing out to open a cut along Calder's ribs. Not deep, but enough to draw first blood. He spun, faster than Elias expected, the tomahawk whistling through air where Kaia's head had been a heartbeat before. She danced back, light on her feet, circling left, making him turn, making him work. Is that all you've got, Colonel? She taunted. Big man who kills from ambush, burns sleeping camps. How's it feel to face someone who fights back? Calder didn't answer, just pressed forward, using his reach advantage to keep her moving. He was methodical, patient, cutting off angles, forcing her toward the edge of the circle where her movement would be restricted, but Kaia was faster, more fluid. She ducked under a tomahawk swing and drove her knife toward his stomach. Calder twisted, taking the blade on his belt buckle, the metal deflecting the point. He grabbed for her wrist, but she was already gone, flowing away like water. They fought in silence, broken only by the sound of breathing and the clash of metal on metal. Calder was strong, experienced, brutal. Kaia was quick, trained, furious. For long minutes they matched each other, neither gaining clear advantage. Then Calder changed tactics. He feinted high with the tomahawk, and when Kaia moved to block, he kicked low, his boot catching her knee. She stumbled, and he was on her instantly, driving her to the ground, his weight crushing down. Elias started forward, instinct overriding thought, but hands grabbed him. The Crow warriors had moved down from the heights, forming a ring around the circle to ensure the rules were followed. They held him back, impassive, allowing the combat to continue. Kaia fought like a wildcat, all teeth and nails and desperate strength. She got her knife up, stabbing toward Calder's throat, but he caught her wrist and slammed it against the ground until her fingers opened and the knife fell free. He straddled her, one hand on her throat, the other raising the tomahawk for a killing blow. "Not so fierce now, are you? Just another savage who thought she could stand against civilization." Kaia's hand scrabbled in the dirt beside her, fingers finding something, a rock, rough and palm-sized. She swung it up with every ounce of strength she had left, connecting with Calder's temple. The impact made a sound like a tree branch snapping. Calder's eyes went unfocused, and he toppled sideways, blood streaming from a gash above his ear. Kaia rolled away, gasping, and retrieved her knife. She stood over Calder, the blade pointed at his throat, her chest heaving with exertion and rage. "Yield," she said. Calder's hand tightened on the tomahawk. "Never. Then die knowing you were beaten by the savage girl you thought was nothing." She drove the knife down, but Calder rolled at the last instant, the blade scoring across his shoulder instead of his heart. He came up swinging the tomahawk in a wild arc that caught Kaia across the forearm, opening a deep cut that sprayed blood. She cried out but didn't drop her weapon, switching the knife to her left hand, her right arm hanging useless. Calder pressed the advantage, forcing her back, blow after blow, the tomahawk seeking her flesh. But he was slowing too. Blood loss and the head wound were taking their toll. His movements became sluggish, less precise. When he swung next, Kaia didn't dodge. She stepped inside his reach and drove her knife up under his ribs, angled toward his heart. Calder made a sound, surprise more than pain, and looked down at the blade buried in his chest. His tomahawk fell from nerveless fingers. He swayed, took one step back, then another. "Impossible," he breathed. "Nothing's impossible when the land itself demands justice," Kaia said. And then the ground beneath Calder's feet opened. It happened so fast that Elias almost missed it. One moment Calder was standing, the next he was falling, the earth splitting in a perfectly circular crack that widened to swallow him whole. He didn't even have time to scream, just disappeared into darkness that closed up after him like a mouth, leaving nothing but smooth earth where he'd been standing. The silence that followed was absolute. Every man watching, Calder's raiders, the Crow warriors, Elias himself, stared at the spot where their colonel had vanished. The standing stones seemed to hum with satisfaction, the air clearing like after a thunderstorm. Kaia stood swaying, blood dripping from her wounded arm, her face pale but triumphant. "The circle is judged," she said to the assembled witnesses. "Let it be known that Colonel Rhett Calder answered for his crimes. Let it be known that he fell not to my blade, but to the weight of his own dishonor." Webb stepped forward, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "What sorcery is this? What demon trick?" "No trick," the Crow leader called out from his position. "Only the old law. Your colonel entered the circle with murder in his heart and lies on his lips. The sacred ground demanded truth, and he had none to give. He is judged and found wanting." You expect us to believe that?" Webb's hand went to where his gun belt would have been, finding nothing. "The ground just opened up? That's not possible." "Believe what you want," Elias said, finding his voice. "But your colonel is gone. You can accept that and ride away, or you can try to avenge him and face the Crow warriors and whatever else this place decides to do to people who violate its laws. Your choice." The raiders looked at each other, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Without Calder's iron will holding them together, they were just men, tired, scared men a long way from anything they understood. One by one, they began to back away from the circle, mounting their horses, looking anywhere but at the spot where their leader had disappeared. Webb was the last to leave, his eyes promising vengeance as he stared at Elias. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Elias replied. "Go home. Find something better to do with your life than following dead men's orders." Webb spat, then wheeled his horse and galloped after the others. Within minutes, the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely, leaving only silence and the wind moving through the standing stones. Elias rushed to Kaia's side as she collapsed, catching her before she hit the ground. Her right arm was a mess of blood, the cut deep and still flowing freely. "Stay with me," he said, tearing fabric from his shirt to make a bandage. You did it. You beat him. We did it, she corrected, her voice weak. Together. The Crow leader approached, studying them both with eyes that gave away nothing. The sacred ground has spoken. Justice is satisfied. We will witness this truth to all who ask. Thank you, Kaia said in her own language, the words formal and respectful. The warrior nodded once, then gestured to his men. They withdrew as silently as they'd come, disappearing into the forest like smoke, leaving Elias and Kaia alone in the circle with the stones and the silence. Elias bound Kaia's wound as tightly as he could, trying to stop the bleeding. She'd lost a lot of blood, her skin pale and clammy, her breathing shallow. We need to get you somewhere I can treat this properly, he said. In a minute. First. She looked at the spot where Calder had vanished, her expression complex. I need to know I didn't imagine it, that he's really gone. He's gone. Whatever happened here, however it happened, he's gone. She nodded slowly, tears finally coming, streaming down her face in silence. Not tears of grief, but of release, of a burden finally set down after carrying it so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. Elias held her while she wept. This fierce woman who'd saved his life and given him purpose and shown him that redemption was possible even for someone like him. He held her and made a silent promise to the empty circle and the watching stones, that he'd honor what they'd done here, that he'd be worthy of the second chance, that he'd spend whatever time he had left trying to build instead of destroy. When Kaia's tears subsided, he helped her to her feet, and they walked together out of the circle, leaving behind the sacred ground that had witnessed one more conflict resolved, one more accounting balanced. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere ahead lay a future neither of them could predict, but both had fought to reach. And for the first time in longer than Elias could remember, that future held something other than running or hiding or dying. It held possibility. They made it less than a mile before Kaia's legs gave out completely. Elias caught her as she sagged against her horse, her face the color of ash, the makeshift bandage on her arm soaked through with blood that kept coming no matter how tight he'd wrapped it. We need to stop, he said, though every instinct screamed at him to keep moving, to put distance between them and the circle before Webb decided to come back with reinforcements. No, Kaia protested weakly. Keep going. Get away from here. You're bleeding out. Another mile and you'll be dead. He guided her down from the saddle, supporting her weight. There's a cave system near here. I saw it on the approach. We hole up there. I treat your wound properly, and we move when you're strong enough to ride. She didn't have the strength to argue. He half carried her through the forest as darkness fell, following a stream that led to the cave entrance he'd spotted earlier, a narrow opening between boulders that widened into a space large enough for them and the horses. Not ideal, but defensible. And more importantly, sheltered. He got Kaia settled on a bed of pine branches, then built a fire near the cave mouth where the smoke would dissipate before giving away their position. The horses stood nearby, nervous but too exhausted to protest their surroundings. When he had light to work by, Elias unwrapped Kaia's arm and examined the damage. The tomahawk had cut deep, slicing through muscle down to bone. The edges of the wound were ragged, already showing signs of inflammation. Without proper treatment, infection would set in within days. This is bad, he said quietly. I know. Kaia's voice was barely a whisper. Do what you can. He had needle and thread in his saddlebag, basic field surgery supplies every soldier carried. He'd sewn up wounds before, both his own and others, but never anything this severe. His hands shook as he threaded the needle, whether from exhaustion or fear he couldn't say. This is going to hurt, he warned. Everything hurts already. Just do it. He cleaned the wound as best he could with water from his canteen, then began stitching. Kaia bit down on a leather strap, her body going rigid with pain, but she didn't cry out. Sweat beaded on her forehead and tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, but she stayed silent, letting him work. It took 23 stitches to close the wound. By the time he finished, Elias's shirt was soaked with sweat and his hands were cramping. He wrapped the arm in clean cloth torn from his spare shirt, then sat back, utterly spent. You're tougher than most soldiers I've known, he said. Had to be. My people don't have the luxury of weakness. She tried to sit up, failed, and lay back down. Tell me the truth. How bad is it? You'll live. Probably lose some use of the arm if infection sets in, but if we can keep the wound clean and get you to someone who knows healing better than I do, you should recover. He moved to sit beside her, checking her forehead for fever. Already warm, but not burning yet. There's a trading post 3 days north, Fort Benson. They'll have a doctor, or at least someone with medical training. 3 days? Kaia closed her eyes. That's a long time to stay ahead of Webb and whoever else Calder left behind. Then we make it 2 days, push hard, rest when we have to. He adjusted the blanket covering her. But tonight, you sleep. I'll keep watch. She was asleep before he finished speaking, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of exhaustion. Elias sat watching her in the firelight, this woman who'd saved his life and his soul, who'd shown him that fighting for something mattered more than running from everything. The night passed slowly. He dozed in fits, jerking awake at every sound, hand on his pistol, expecting attack. But nothing came except wind and the distant calls of night birds, and once the howl of wolves far enough away to be someone else's problem. Dawn found them both still alive, Kaia's fever slightly worse but manageable. He changed her bandage, relieved to see no red streaks spreading from the wound, no blood poisoning yet at least. She ate a little jerky and drank water, her color marginally better. "We should move," she said. "Staying in one place makes us targets. Can you ride?" "I can do whatever I have to do." It took both of them and considerable effort to get her into the saddle, but once there she sat upright, determined. Elias tied her reins to his saddle horn so he could lead her horse if she lost consciousness, then mounted his buckskin mare. They rode north through country that grew progressively more civilized, game trails widening into wagon roads, cleared sections where homesteaders had tried to carve farms from wilderness. And finally, on the afternoon of the second day, the first signs of Fort Benson on the horizon. The trading post was more substantial than Elias had expected. A cluster of buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade, with enough people coming and going to suggest real commerce. They approached slowly, Elias's hand resting on his pistol, watching for any sign of Calder's men. But the guards at the gate just waved them through after a cursory inspection, more interested in merchants with goods to sell than two exhausted travelers on worn-out horses. Inside the fort, Elias found the doctor's office, a small building marked with a painted red cross. He helped Kaia down from her horse and half-carried her inside, calling for help. The doctor was a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and the capable hands of someone who'd treated every injury imaginable. She took one look at Kaia's arm and pointed to an examination table. "How long ago?" she asked, unwrapping the bandage. 2 days. "You do these stitches?" "Yes, ma'am." She examined his work with a critical eye, probing the wound gently. Not bad for field medicine. Probably saved her arm, maybe her life. But this needs proper cleaning and better stitching. You'll want to wait outside. "I'm staying," Elias said. The doctor looked at him, then at Kaia, reading something in their expressions. "Suit yourself. But make yourself useful. There's water heating on the stove. Bring it here." For the next hour, Elias followed orders, fetching water, holding Kaia down when the pain got too intense, providing a third hand when the doctor needed it. She removed his stitches, cleaned the wound with something that made Kaia scream despite the leather strap between her teeth, then re-sewed it with neat, precise stitches that would heal cleaner than his rough field work. When it was done, the doctor bandaged the arm and mixed a powder into water, forcing Kaia to drink it. "Willow bark and other things," she explained, "for the pain and fever. She needs rest, clean water, and proper food. A week minimum before she should do anything strenuous. 2 weeks before she rides hard or uses that arm for anything demanding." "We don't have 2 weeks," Kaia protested. "Then you'll lose the arm to infection or permanent damage. Your choice." The doctor turned to Elias. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over, clean rooms, decent food. Get her there, make her rest, and come see me every day so I can check the wound. Cost is $5 total, 2 for the treatment, 3 for the follow-up visits." Elias paid without hesitation, using the last of his money. The doctor gave him a bottle of medicine and instructions, then shooed them out so she could tend to her next patient. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions when Elias paid for a room and helped Kaia up the stairs. The room was small but clean. A bed, a chair, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Luxury compared to weeks sleeping on the ground. Kaia collapsed onto the bed and was asleep within minutes. Elias sat in the chair, watching her breathe, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settling into his bones. They'd done it. They'd survived. Calder was dead, his raiders scattered, and for the first time since this whole thing started, they had a moment to breathe. The question was what came next. He must have dozed off because he woke to find afternoon had turned to evening. And Kaia was awake, watching him with eyes that were clearer than they'd been in days. "You look terrible," she said. "Right back at you." She smiled faintly. "How long have I been asleep?" 6 hours, give or take. Doctor says you need to rest for at least a week. We don't have a week. Webb's still out there. So are the others. Webb and the others just watched their colonel get swallowed by the earth. They're not coming after us. They're too busy trying to figure out what to do with themselves now that the man holding them together is gone. Elias stood and poured water from the pitcher into a cup, bringing it to her. "We're safe here. For now, at least." Kaia drank, then lay back against the pillows. "What happened at the circle? Did you see what I saw? The ground really opened?" "I saw it. So did 40 other men and 20 Crow warriors. Whatever that place is, whatever power it holds, it's real. My father would have said the land remembers. That places where blood has been spilled for generations develop a kind of consciousness, a will of their own." She stared at the ceiling. "I always thought it was just stories, teaching tales to keep young warriors honest. But now we know better." Elias sat back down in the chair. "The question is what we do with that knowledge. Tell people. Make sure the story spreads, so that Calder's death means something beyond just revenge." She turned her head to look at him. "And then I find my people and help them rebuild. That's still the plan?" "It's always been the plan. Nothing's changed." But something had changed, and they both knew it. The silence that fell between them was heavy with unspoken things: gratitude, connection, the possibility of something more if circumstances were different. Finally, Kaia spoke. "What about you? What's your plan?" "Honestly, I don't know. First time in my adult life I don't have orders to follow or someone hunting me." He rubbed his face, feeling days of beard growth rough against his palms. "It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. You could come with me. Help with the rebuilding." "You think your people would accept that? A white man, a former raider, showing up to help rebuild what men like me destroyed?" "I think my people are practical. They need help. They need allies. And they need people willing to work hard without asking for anything in return." She met his eyes. "You've proven you're willing to fight for what's right, even when it costs you everything. That counts for something." Elias wanted to believe her, wanted to imagine a future where he could be useful instead of destructive. But doubt gnawed at him. "I wouldn't know where to start," he admitted. "Start by staying. Start by showing up every day and doing the work. The rest..." She shrugged with her good shoulder. "The rest figures itself out." Before he could respond, shouting erupted from the street below. Elias was at the window instantly, pistol drawn, searching for threats. What he saw made his blood run cold. Webb stood in the middle of the street, still armed despite the fort's regulations, his face twisted with rage. 6 men flanked him, the last of Calder's true believers, the ones too far gone to walk away. "Vance!" Webb's voice carried clearly. "I know you're in here somewhere. Come out and face me, you coward. You and that Indian witch. Let's finish this properly." Elias's mind raced through options. They could stay hidden, hope Webb gave up and left. They could try to slip out the back, run again. Or they could end it here, now, before Webb's obsession spread to the others and created a new cycle of violence. "Stay here," he told Kaia. "Like hell I will." She struggled to sit up, her wounded arm held against her chest. "This is my fight as much as yours. You can barely stand, and your arm's useless. You go down there, you're dead. Better to die fighting than hiding." Her eyes blazed with the same fierce determination he'd seen in the circle. "We started this together. We finish it together." Downstairs, Mrs. Chen was blocking the door, arguing with Webb's men in rapid-fire English mixed with what sounded like Cantonese. The fort's guards had appeared but were keeping their distance. This was clearly a personal dispute, and frontier law said personal disputes got settled by the people involved. Elias helped Kaia down the stairs, supporting her weight, his pistol in his free hand. They emerged onto the porch, and the street went quiet. Webb's eyes lit up with vindication when he saw them. There they are, the traitor and his whore. Thought you could just walk away after what you did? After you murdered the colonel? I didn't murder anyone, Elias said calmly. The colonel entered sacred ground with dishonor in his heart, and the land itself judged him. You were there. You saw what happened. I saw witchcraft, saw you and her use demon tricks to murder a good man. Webb's hand hovered over his pistol. But you can't trick bullets, Vance. Can't make the ground swallow me when I put you down. Webb, listen to me. It's over. Calder's gone, his operation is finished, and the men who followed him are scattered. You keep pushing this, and you'll end up the same way he did, dead for no reason except pride. Pride? Webb laughed, high and brittle. This isn't about pride. This is about loyalty, about standing by your people even when it costs you, something you wouldn't understand, traitor. Elias felt Kaia tense beside him, felt the moment shift from words to action. He moved before Webb could draw, stepping in front of Kaia, his pistol coming up in one smooth motion. But Webb was fast, faster than Elias had given him credit for. His pistol cleared leather and fired, the shot echoing through the fort like thunder. The bullet caught Elias high in the left shoulder, spinning him around, his own shot going wide. He stayed on his feet through sheer will, bringing his pistol back up even as blood spread across his shirt. Webb fired again, but Kaia had moved, throwing herself sideways despite her wounded arm, pulling Elias with her. The bullet passed through the space where they'd been standing and buried itself in the wall behind them. Then the fort's guards moved in, rifles leveled at Webb and his men. Drop your weapons, the guard captain ordered. Now, this fort don't allow gunfights in the streets. For a moment, Webb looked like he might fight anyway, might go down shooting just to make a point. But his men were already lowering their weapons, hands raised, survival instinct overriding loyalty to a dead cause. Webb's pistol clattered to the ground. His shoulders slumped, all the rage draining out of him, leaving just a hollow young man who'd bet everything on the wrong leader and lost. You should have stayed with us, he said to Elias. Should have been loyal. Loyalty to something evil isn't a virtue, Marcus. It's just another form of cowardice. Elias pressed his hand against his shoulder, trying to stem the bleeding. Find something better to be loyal to. Find something worth dying for instead of just someone to die with. The guards arrested Webb and his men, hauling them off to whatever passed for a jail in Fort Benson. Mrs. Chen rushed out with cloths and water, helping Elias back inside while yelling at him in 3 languages for bleeding on her porch. The doctor was less sympathetic when Elias showed up at her office for the second time in one day. You're going to be the death of me, she muttered, cutting away his shirt to expose the wound. Bullet went through clean, missed the bone in major vessels. You're lucky and stupid in equal measure. Story of my life, Elias said through gritted teeth as she began cleaning the wound. The treatment took an hour, cleaning, stitching, bandaging. When she finished, the doctor pointed at him with blood-stained scissors. You and your friend are banned from doing anything exciting for at least 2 weeks. No fighting, no riding hard, no heroics. You rest, you heal. You let your bodies recover from the idiotic things you've put them through. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Good. Now get out of my office before someone else shows up bleeding. Back at the boarding house, Elias found Kaia sitting at the window, watching the street. She turned when he entered, relief washing over her face. You're all right? I'll live. Doctor says we're both banned from excitement for 2 weeks. He sat on the bed, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. So I guess we're staying put whether we like it or not. Could be worse. Could be dead. Could be a lot of things. He looked at her, this woman who'd become his partner, his friend, maybe something more given time. Thank you for pulling me out of the way, for staying when you could have run. Same reason you freed me from Calder's camp instead of turning me in. She moved to sit beside him, careful of both their injuries. Because some things matter more than survival. They sat in comfortable silence as evening deepened into night and the fort settled into its nighttime routines. Tomorrow, the guards would probably question them about the shooting. Tomorrow, they'd have to figure out what came next, where they'd go, what they'd do with the freedom they'd fought so hard to win. But tonight, they were alive and safe and together. and that was enough. The 2 weeks of enforced rest passed slower than any campaign Elias had ever endured. The doctor checked their wounds daily, gradually pronouncing herself satisfied with their healing. The fort's commander questioned them about Webb and the shooting, ultimately deciding it was self-defense and releasing them with a warning to avoid future gunfights in his jurisdiction. Webb and his men were sentenced to labor on the fort's expansion project, 6 months of hard work to pay for the disturbance they'd caused. Elias saw Webb once from a distance, hauling logs, and felt something like pity. The young man had bet everything on Calder's vision and lost it all. What he'd do when his sentence was served, Elias couldn't guess. But that was Webb's path to walk, not his. As their strength returned, Elias and Kaia began making plans. She'd heard through the fort's network of traders and travelers that remnants of her people had gathered 2 weeks' ride northwest, near the Canadian border. They were rebuilding slowly, combining survivors from multiple bands, trying to preserve what they could of their culture while adapting to a world that had changed forever. "I need to go to them," Kaia said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset. "Help however I can. Make sure the stories are told so what happened isn't forgotten." "I know. Will you come with me?" Elias had been expecting the question, had spent 2 weeks thinking about his answer. There were reasons to say no. He was still white, still a former raider, still carrying baggage that might never fully lighten. But there were also reasons to say yes, reasons that had everything to do with the woman sitting beside him and the future they might build together. "On one condition," he said. "What's that?" "That you let me earn my place. I don't want charity or special treatment because I helped you. I want to work, to prove myself, to actually contribute something meaningful." He turned to look at her. "I've spent my whole adult life destroying things. I want to learn how to build." Kaia studied his face, searching for doubt or hesitation. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her features from beautiful to radiant. "Then you'll fit right in. We're all learning how to build from ruins." She offered her hand, the gesture formal. "Partners?" "Partners," he agreed, taking her hand. They left Fort Benson 3 days later, both healed enough to travel, provisioned with supplies purchased from the fort's traders. The morning they departed, Mrs. Chen pressed food into their hands and told them in mixed languages that they were always welcome back. The doctor gave them medicine and instructions and a warning that if they showed up at her office one more time with bullet wounds, she'd shoot them herself. The journey northwest took them through country that grew progressively wilder, the traces of white settlement fading until they were back in pure wilderness. But it felt different now, not threatening but full of possibility, a landscape waiting to be lived in rather than conquered. They traveled at a steady pace, their bodies still healing but growing stronger each day. At night, they made camp and talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, the future they hoped to build. Slowly, carefully, they were becoming something more than just survivors thrown together by circumstances. They were becoming partners in the truest sense, friends, and maybe, given time, something deeper still. On the 14th day, they crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from a valley below. Not the black smoke of destruction, but the gray smoke of cookfires and life continuing. A collection of lodges spread across the valley floor, smaller than Kaia's original village, but growing. As they descended, people began emerging from the lodges, watching them approach with cautious curiosity. Kaia raised her hand in greeting, calling out in her language, and recognition rippled through the gathering crowd. An older woman stepped forward, her face marked with the deep lines of someone who'd survived more than should be possible. When she saw Kaia, her expression transformed from wariness to joy. "You're alive," the woman said in English for Elias's benefit. "We heard about the raid, thought everyone was lost." "Many were lost," Kaia replied. "But I survived, and I've brought help." The woman's eyes shifted to Elias, evaluating him with the sharp gaze of someone who'd learned to judge character quickly and accurately. "Who is this?" "His name is Elias Vance. He was one of Calder's men, but he chose differently. He freed me, helped me survive, stood with me when I challenged Calder in the circle of judgment." Kaia moved to stand beside Elias, a gesture of solidarity. "The colonel is dead, his raiders scattered. This man helped make that happen. The crowd murmured, mixing skepticism with curiosity. The older woman continued studying Elias, and he met her gaze steadily, making no excuses, offering no explanations beyond what Kaia had already given. Finally, the woman spoke. I am White Moon, elder of this gathering. If Kaia vouches for you, we will give you a chance. But trust must be earned through actions, not words. I understand, Elias said. I'm not asking for trust or acceptance, just a chance to work, to help, to prove that I can be better than what I was. White Moon nodded slowly. Then you will have your chance. We need help rebuilding lodges before winter. You know how to work? I can learn? Good. Kaia will show you where to put your things. Tomorrow, the work begins. The crowd dispersed, returning to their tasks but casting curious glances at the newcomer in their midst. Kaia led Elias to an empty lodge at the edge of the settlement. Small, needing repairs, but with good bones. This can be yours if you want it, she said, or you can share with others if you prefer company. Elias looked at the lodge, then at the valley spread out before them, then at Kaia standing beside him. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something like peace settling into his chest. I'll take it, he said, and I'll fix it up properly. Make it something that lasts. Good, she smiled. Welcome home, Elias. Home. The word echoed in his mind as he unpacked his few belongings and began assessing what repairs the lodge needed. Home wasn't a place he'd had since before the war, since before Sarah died and his life fell apart. But maybe that was changing. Maybe home could be something you built, rather than something you were born to. The weeks that followed were the hardest physical labor Elias had ever done, and somehow the most satisfying. He worked alongside the men and women of the settlement, learning their methods, their language, their ways. He cut timber and hauled stones and mixed mud for chinking and did everything he was asked without complaint. Some people remained suspicious, keeping their distance, watching for signs that he was still the enemy. Others gradually warmed to him, appreciating that he worked hard and asked for nothing beyond the chance to contribute. Children were the first to fully accept him, fascinated by his stories of places they'd never seen and his willingness to answer endless questions. Kaia worked alongside him, her arm healing well enough to be useful again, helping wherever she was needed. In the evenings, they often sat together outside his lodge, talking about the day's work, the settlement's needs, the future that was slowly taking shape. One evening, as autumn began painting the valley in shades of gold and red, Kaia brought up a topic they'd been circling around for weeks. White Moon asked me about you today, she said. What about me? Whether you plan to stay, whether this is temporary until you figure out what you really want, or if you're committed. Elias watched the sun sink behind the western peaks, coloring the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. What did you tell her? That I didn't know. That it was your decision to make. She paused. But she asked me to ask you directly. The settlement needs to know if they're investing in someone who'll stay or just passing through. It was a fair question. Elias had spent months running, never committing to anything beyond the next day's survival. But something had shifted during his time here. He'd found purpose in the work, satisfaction in building rather than destroying, and something that felt like belonging in the community slowly forming around him. I'm staying, he said. If they'll have me. This feels like the first real home I've had since before the war. I don't want to throw that away. Kaia smiled, and there was warmth in it that made his chest tight. Good, because I'd miss you if you left. Just miss me? Don't push your luck, she said, but her tone was teasing. Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in snow that reached past the knees and turned the world into something clean and new. The settlement hunkered down, relying on stored food and shared warmth to survive the coldest months. Elias spent his days helping maintain the lodges, hunting when the weather allowed, and learning everything the elders would teach him about surviving in this harsh but beautiful land. He learned to read weather in the behavior of animals, to find water under ice, to predict storms by the feel of the air. More importantly, he learned to be part of a community, to share burdens and celebrations, to put the group's needs ahead of his own wants, to trust and be trusted in return. It was harder than any campaign he'd fought in, demanded more courage than facing down armed enemies, but it was also rewarding in ways he'd never experienced. On the winter solstice, the settlement held a ceremony honoring those who'd been lost in Calder's raids. Names were spoken, stories told, tears shed for parents and children and friends who would never return. When Kaia spoke her father's name, her voice breaking with grief, Elias stood beside her, offering silent support. Afterward, White Moon approached him as he stood alone, watching the last of the ceremonial fire burn down. "You've done well," she said. "The others have noticed. You work hard, learn quickly, respect our ways. That speaks well of your character. I'm trying to be better than I was. We're all trying to do that. The question is whether we actually do the work or just talk about it." She studied him with those sharp eyes that seemed to see through all pretense. "You've done the work, so I'll tell you something I haven't told the others yet." "What's that?" "Come spring, we're planning to expand, send out parties to find other survivors, bring them here, build something larger and more permanent. We'll need people willing to travel, to negotiate, to help scattered groups find their way to safety." She paused. "I want you to lead one of those parties." Elias stared at her, stunned. "Me? I don't have the authority." "You have something more valuable than authority. You have respect. The people here have seen you change, seen you earn your place through honest work, and you understand both our world and the white world. That makes you valuable." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Think about it. Give me your answer when the snow melts." She walked away, leaving Elias standing in the cold, his mind spinning. To be trusted with something that important, to be given real responsibility for the settlement's future, it was more than he dared hope for. He found Kaia in her lodge, tending to a small fire. She looked up when he entered, saw something in his expression, and set aside what she was working on. "What happened?" He told her about White Moon's offer, watching her face for reaction. When he finished, she was smiling. "You're going to say yes, aren't you?" "I don't know. It's a huge responsibility. What if I mess it up? What if I lead people into danger? Then you'll deal with it, same as you've dealt with everything else since you freed me from that cell." She stood and moved to face him. "Elias, you've proven you can be trusted. You've proven you care about more than just yourself. That's all anyone can ask. Will you come with me when I go searching for survivors? Is that an invitation or a request?" "Both. I work better with a partner. And you're the best partner I've ever had." Kaia's expression softened. "Then yes, I'll come with you. We'll do this together, like we've done everything else." Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing a landscape that had survived another brutal winter. The settlement had lost 3 elders to age and sickness, but 2 babies had been born, and the balance tipped toward hope. When Elias told White Moon he'd accept her offer, she simply nodded as if she'd never doubted his answer. Plans were made, routes discussed, supplies gathered. 2 other search parties would head in different directions while Elias and Kaia traveled southeast, toward territories where refugees might have fled. The morning they left, nearly the whole settlement turned out to see them off. Children pressed small gifts into their hands, beaded tokens for luck, dried meat for the journey, drawings to remind them what they were working toward. White Moon gave them her blessing in the old language, words that Elias still didn't fully understand but that carried weight nonetheless. As they rode out of the valley, Elias looked back once. The settlement that had seemed so small and fragile when he'd first arrived now looked solid, permanent, like something that would endure. He'd helped build part of that permanence, had literally laid stones and raised lodges that would shelter people for years to come. It wasn't redemption. He'd never be foolish enough to think he'd fully atoned for the harm he'd done. But it was a start, a foundation he could build on for however much time he had left. They traveled for 3 weeks, following rumors and reports, finding scattered families and lone survivors who'd been hiding in the wilderness, afraid to trust anyone. With patience and Kaia's ability to speak multiple tribal languages, they gradually convinced groups to join them, to take a chance on the settlement that was being built. By the time they turned back toward home, they had 17 people with them, men, women, children, elders. A small victory, but victory nonetheless. The settlement welcomed them back with celebration, folding the newcomers into the community with practiced ease. Elias watched families reunite, saw hope kindled in eyes that had been dead with grief, and felt something settle in his chest that he finally recognized as contentment. That evening, he and Kaia sat on a hill overlooking the valley, watching lights appear in lodge windows as darkness fell. "We did good work," Kaia said. "We did, and we'll do more." "Is this what you imagined when you freed me from that cell?" Elias thought about it, about the desperate man he'd been then, running from himself as much as from Calder. "No, I didn't imagine anything beyond the next day, the next hour. Survival was the only goal. And now? Now I'm thinking about next season, next year, the future we're building here." He turned to look at her, this woman who'd saved him in ways that had nothing to do with physical rescue. "I'm thinking about building a life instead of just surviving one." Kaia met his eyes, and what he saw there made his breath catch. Not just friendship or partnership, but something deeper, something that had been growing slowly between them over months of shared work and shared dreams. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Building a life. Together." "Together," he agreed. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, and they sat watching the valley settle into night. In the distance, wolves howled, a sound that used to mean danger, but now just meant wild things living free in a wild place. Tomorrow there would be more work, lodges to repair, food to gather, plans to make for winter. But tonight, they had this moment, this peace, this possibility of a future worth living. Elias had spent years as a soldier, following orders, destroying lives in service to causes he didn't fully understand. He'd spent months as a raider, becoming the thing he most despised. But now he was something different, a builder, a partner, a man slowly learning to forgive himself by doing better. The path to redemption was long and hard, but he was walking it, not alone, never alone anymore, but with Kaia beside him and a community that had given him the greatest gift possible, a second chance. As stars emerged overhead, countless and cold and beautiful, Elias felt the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. Not disappearing, it would never fully disappear, but balanced now by the weight of better choices, of lives saved instead of taken, of things built instead of destroyed. The war that had defined him for so long was finally over, not because the shooting had stopped, that had happened years ago, but because he'd stopped fighting himself, stopped running from what he'd been, and started building what he could become. And in this valley, with this woman, among these people, he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. He'd found home. The story that had begun with violence and ended with the earth itself demanding justice had found its resolution not in revenge, but in renewal. Calder was gone, his reign of terror finished, but more importantly, the people he'd tried to destroy were rebuilding, stronger, wiser, united. And Elias Vance, former soldier, former raider, former lost soul, had become part of that rebuilding, had earned his place through honest work and honest change. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, bearing witness to one more story of fall and redemption played out on the frontier. And in a valley where survivors gathered to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed, two people sat together watching the night deepen, bound by shared history and shared hope. The future was uncertain. It always was. But for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, uncertain didn't mean hopeless. It meant full of possibility, full of life, full of the promise that tomorrow could be better than yesterday if you did the work to make it so. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.